Yes. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight for our full council. We don't intend to have any fire drills, so if you do an hear alarm, please make your way out safely and assemble in the car park up on the top level. Thank you. So, first of item, apologies, please. Oh, he's over there now. Tommy.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Hughes, Hobson, Flitter, Purdy, Wakeman, Fitzherbert, Councillor Mrs Morley, Councillor Mr Morley, Councillor Gretrix, Councillor Murphy and Councillor Chapman.
Okay, thank you. Item 2, public participation. You will possibly have all seen in front of you questions and responses. These aren't going to be read out. They will be put on the website if they haven't already been done so. But these are the public questions that have been taken. So have you all had chance to read them? Would you like a couple of minutes? Yeah? Okay, a couple of minutes to just peruse over them. Thank you.
Chair, may I just make a point of order, please? Obviously, we've gone from reading these, people used to come in person and make representation, and now they're being encouraged not to because of COVID. And I just feel that people have taken the time and effort to, initially we were having the responses read out, probably by the leader of the council, who unfortunately can't be with us tonight. Can this be looked at, please, under the Constitution Committee? Because I just feel that people are taking the time and effort to make valid comment into issues that touch upon the council. But it's like not everybody has access to a computer. And how will people in the general public know to look at these documents online? Thank you.
Point taken upon that. And obviously, I take your point as regards to members of the public not being able to come due to COVID, and that will be looked into. I will bring that matter up. Thank you. Okay, members, are we all happy with? Okay, I'm going to move on. Thank you, everybody. So item 3, approval of the minutes from the previous meeting, which is the 3rd of March.
I'll move them, Chair. Second, Chair.
All those in favour, please show. Councillor Salt, are you? Sorry, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Item 4, interests. Has any member got any interest to declare at this point in time? No? Okay, thank you. Leaders' announcements. Obviously, unfortunately, Councillor Purdy is unable to be here tonight. He's contracted COVID, unfortunately, and he's quite poorly, so that will be led for another time. So I would like to then move on now to Chairman's announcements. So, Councillor Wayne.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I'd just like to pass on our best wishes to all those members and members of staff from the organisation that have got COVID and wish them a speedy recovery. I'd just like to say on the 6th of February 2022, I attended a choral evensong for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. I wasn't singing, but it was a very good event. It was a very good event. On the 26th and 27th of February 2022, I attended, along with my wife, Derbyshire Amateur Swimming Championships at the Ark in Matlock. I'd like to say this was a really well-organised event, enabling hundreds of young swimmers to showcase their talents. It also portrayed the Ark Leisure Centre, one of our assets, in a very positive light. It was reassuring for me, having been in a number of meetings where we've gone and allocated funds to Freedom Leisure, but to see all those young people thriving and, you know, challenging each other, it was very, very reassuring. Plus it puts, you know, it puts pounds in our local economy. So that was great. On the 2nd of March, I attended Ashbourne Shrovetide luncheon at Ashbourne Leisure Centre, where I was introduced to the turner-upper, Roger Jones. And I'd like to thank Councillor Bull and Councillor Lees for their help on that day. Myself and my wife truly enjoyed the experience, and it was the first time I've ever attended that event and not been involved in the actual game. And it was very frustrating because I got this round my neck, and but that's that. You'll be pleased to know the final thing. On the 17th of March, I attended Bakewell, Brassington and Steeple Arch cemeteries and took part in the consecration of new areas of ground. The services were conducted by the Bishop of Repton, and I'd like to thank all those district councillors who attended the respective services. And again, it was a really enjoyable thing, something that I never thought I would have been doing in my lifetime. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Item 7, to receive the non-exempt minutes of the other council meetings. So we've had the council meeting on the 27th of January, Planning Committee, Extraordinary Council and Community Environment. We've all had the minutes.
May I raise a point of order here, Chair, please?
Councillor O'Brien.
Chair, this point of order relates to minute 291/21 of item 6 of the Community and Environment Committee, which was held on 23rd of February. This is the item which considered Her Majesty the Queen's Jubilee Fund. Part 3 of our Constitution, paragraph C on page 3 of it, reserves to the Council considering all proposals which seek to establish new policy or which seek a significant departure from existing policy. Now, in my opinion, this particular item was a new proposal, entirely new proposal, and therefore was not within the remit of the Community and Environment Committee to be considered. It should have been reserved to Council as per the Constitution. I therefore put to you that the minute decision was ultra vires, and that the matter should be brought to the next appropriate meeting of the Council for consideration and decision.
Right, Councillor O'Brien, I'm just going to move over to legal to explain.
Thank you, Chair. This was raised by Councillor O'Brien earlier. I have emailed him back at 3:45, so apologies if you've not seen that. But if I just read the response that I emailed, I'd like to say first, my first point is I don't consider this to be a valid point of order. I accept the Constitution in Part 4, 1812, that a point of order is in respect of alleged breach of the Council's rules, procedure or the law. I accept this is open to interpretation, but the reason for a point of order is stop the Council from doing something wrong before it happens. Item 7 on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the meeting. If you say the minutes are wrong, then that's a valid objection, but the minutes are correct. They should be approved even if the decision is considered incorrect, as you are approving what happened, not if what happened was legally correct. I consider the correct procedure, if you think the Council has made an illegal decision, is use the provisions under Part 4 of Section 24 to seek a rescission of the preceding decision on the grounds that the original decision was ultra vires, or to use the judicial review provisions. That said, I do not believe that Section 24, that said, the main issue is whether the decision on the Jubilee is a policy or not. On review of the minutes and the reports of C&E on the 23rd of February, I cannot see how this can be a policy. If it was a decision for all future public celebrations setting a precedent on how the council will deal with these in future, then yes, that could be. But this is a one-off scheme. The budget proposal will be sent to council, which it needs to be, and events fall within the remit of the Community Environment Committee. Thank you, Chair.
So with that, I move back.
Wait a minute, sorry. If Councillor O'Brien has not got anything to say, I would like to make an objection to the minutes, and I don't think they're correct from that item. I've looked at the minutes, I've looked at that meeting, and the proposer who put that motion forward did accept the principle that there would be delegated authority to officers to use any money from the 38,000.
I'm going to stop you now because we're literally going too deep into this. This is all about the minutes. I take the point that you don't feel that they are right. As regards that, it's not about the outcome of what the decisions that were made within it.
But it is, because it's a fund of money now that's not been minuted, that the proposer did actually put forward that they would use, and that's the 38,000 from the other. If there was any outstanding, that would be used for
so as far
parish
as you're
meetings.
Concerned, you don't wish to vote on the community environment of that being wrong.
I'm going to vote against the minutes, yes.
Thank you.
Chair, so I would say that if that's put forward, then anyone else at the meeting that considered that motion was put forward and voted on and approved agrees with Councillor Gamble, then they should raise that objection. But if they believe the minutes are correct, then they vote for them. So my recommendation is we go to the vote on the minutes.
Okay. So we're going to the vote on the minutes that have been put in front.
Chair, can I just ask, can we isolate those minutes from
Okay. So we will do council, planning committee and extraordinary council meeting.
Sorry, Chair,
all in favour?
Chair, on my point of order, could I ask that my point of order is minuted in this meeting?
Your point of order will be minuted, although it wasn't classed as a point of order. It was a statement of fact that something wasn't fully divulged, not the minutes that weren't right.
Can I have it minuted that I don't think the minutes are
correct?
correct?
No more on that one. All in favour of those minutes that I've already stated, council, planning and extraordinary council. All in favour, please show. Thank you. And now for the Community and Environment Committee. As Lee has said on the legal side, those members that were part of it, have they got a problem with it? If they had, I would have thought they'd have probably put something forward. I think it's more about the decision. So all those in favour of the community environment, please show hands. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That is noted in the minutes. Thank you. Item 8, questions from members. Again, I will refer to Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, because Councillor Purdy and Councillor Hobson is not available, then Procedure Rule 15.5c, where a reply cannot conveniently be given orally, a written answer will be circulated later to the questionnaire, and therefore, as there is no one here to give those answers, the answers will be circulated later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, we will move on to item 9, the 3-yearly review of the gaming licensing policy and strategy. Statement, sorry. Councillor, Mr. Braund, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is quite a straightforward report. One of the functions the Council provides through its licensing team is to licence gambling establishments. And within the report it gives a description of what those gambling establishments are. We have to have a policy that enables us to do that. It's called a statement of principles. We've had that statement in place for many years, and every 3 years we have to review it. The review took place. There have been a few minor administrative changes. It's been subject to consultation and no comments have been received. It's also been considered by the Licensing and Appeals Committee. However, in order to be formally adopted, the policy has to come here for Council to consider it. I've nothing further to add to that. It's quite a straightforward report, I think, but members may disagree.
Thank you for that. With this already coming through licensing, I'd like to move straight to debate. So do I find a proposer? Councillor Lees.
Yeah, I'd like to propose the chair as written.
Donnelly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any comments? And we'll go to the vote. All in favour, please show. Against? Abstentions? Councillor Gamble, are you participating? Thank you. Item 10, Capital Strategy Report for 2023 and 22-23. Karen, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of a capital strategy is to provide a high-level overview of how proposed capital expenditure and capital financing are aligned, and to highlight the implications for future financial sustainability. So in other words, to make sure that we've got enough resources to fund our capital programme. There's a few points in the report I'd like to highlight to members. Paragraph 1.4 of the report sets out the two main changes impacting the capital strategy this time. These are revisions to the Prudential Code and to the implementation of accounting standards IFRS 16 for leases. The Prudential Code is issued by SICFA and is based on government advice. And this sets the framework for all our capital expenditure and particularly for borrowing. And the new edition of the Prudential Code, which was published in November, now stipulates that it's not prudent for local authorities to make any investment or spending decision that may lead to new borrowing unless it's directly and primarily related to the functions of the authority. So this is aimed at those authorities that were buying hotels or shopping centres outside their district. It's not something that this council's done or is planning to do, so it shouldn't really have a vast impact on our authority directly. But there is an indirect consequence, and that is if that will come into play if the council intends to borrow from the Public Works Loans Board for its future programme. Because if we now intend to borrow from the Public Works Loans Board, then I will have to sign to say that the council hasn't got any spending plans, whether they're from borrowing or not, that include the acquisition of assets primarily for yield. So, as I say, we haven't ever done that before, but now, even if we wanted to, even if we were using our own reserves and borrowing, we'll be blocked from any other borrowing if we were to consider that. So I wouldn't be able to recommend that in future. Capital expenditure also includes capital investments and corporate investments. So we've included the corporate investment strategy at Appendix 1. That's been updated to reflect the change in the Prudential Code I've just mentioned, removing any references to investments that would be primarily for yield. You will see in the strategy there are still references to projects making a return and so on, and that's good practice if we can do that. We have had, and we've got in the capital programme now, some projects that will make a yield. We're hoping that the cinema project will make a return on the investment, and also I think the solar array project is intended to make a return. So we're allowed to have projects that make an investment return, so long as the purpose of those projects is not primarily for yield and that it's in line with the council's objectives. So those particular projects are being carried out for regeneration and for climate change purposes and not primarily for yield. We do have some borrowing from previous capital expenditure, and we have to set aside amounts from the revenue account to make the repayments of that debt. I think I've mentioned to councillors before that borrowing expires in 2056, and at the moment we're only paying interest on it. We repay the loan itself at the end of the period. So that interest and the way we deal with that comes under the minimum revenue provision strategy, and the statement on that is shown at Appendix 3 to the report. The borrowing strategy is set out in paragraphs 121 to 124 of the report, and we seek to strike a balance between having cheap short-term loans that allow us to access our funds quite quickly and give us good liquidity, and some long-term fixed-rate loans where the future cost is known but it's a lot higher. The current capital programme doesn't indicate new borrowing is required at this stage, but officers are monitoring that closely. We know that the balances on reserves set aside to fund the capital programme are reducing, and I've said at previous meetings that it's likely that we'll need to borrow to finance any significant new capital schemes because we won't have the internal reserves left anymore. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm so far away this evening, I wasn't sure if you could see me there.
Yes, I can see.
I'll stand up. I wonder if you could give me a comment, please, Karen, on paragraph 1.4 in relation to the Public Works Loan Board and the point about the capital spending plans that do not include the acquisition of assets primarily for yield. And I'm thinking again this paragraph in relation to 1.43, which talks about, of course, the Matlock Cinema and Bakewell Road development. But you do make the comment there that that shouldn't affect future funding request to this board. But I'm also thinking that we have made the comment in the past about this specific project perhaps being more suited to a funding loan request rather than using up our own capital or reserves. But you have pointed out why it is more beneficial, as it were, to use our own funds rather than making this sort of intervention. So just a general comment, if you would, please.
Well, as I said in the introduction, the Prudential Code doesn't stop us having projects that make a return. It stops you from having projects where the primary purpose is to make a return. So where we've got a project like the cinema, where its primary purpose is to regenerate the town centre, it's still acceptable to have that make a return to help defray some of our costs. We have discussed that with our advisors, Arlene Close, and to give us a second opinion, and they've assured us that there's no problem there. The second issue about how we finance our capital programme, that's in our own hands to some extent. At the moment, we've always had sufficient reserves to fund projects like these, and when we came with the report in March, as I've said, the current programme doesn't have any borrowing, but you're quite right, if we were to use borrowing in the future, that would give us flexibility to use the reserves for other purposes. At the moment, at the end of the current capital programme, we're predicting there's about £1 million in reserves. So I'm thinking now, you know, rather than dip into that and go further, we might be coming to the time to borrow, which is what I've said the last couple of years. So I'm not against borrowing, but it is more expensive. And if we've got, in effect, savings, why not use those first?
The current rate of interest, by the way, to the public works, it used to be about 2%. It was very advantageous. What is it at the moment with inflation?
I'm not sure what the current rate is. I can tell you the rate we're paying at the moment on the loan we've got is 4.1%. 4.1.
Anybody else wishing to ask any questions? Councillor Cruz.
Thank you, Karen, for the thorough report. There's lots of information to absorb, so it's appreciated. A couple of questions from me. One is, I'm just wondering, you know, in the report it talks about future capital and the risk to being able to cover future capital projects. This particular programme, 22-23, is covered. How do we compare with other councils relative to being able to attract grant funding, and have we got enough resources on that to get money from alternative routes through grant funding? And then the other question I've got is, there's a risk identified in the paragraph 1.5, which is if there was unexpected structural damage to an asset, is there any way that we can cover that off with insurance?
Right, I have to take your first one about grant funding. In my opinion, I don't know a great deal about what other councils do, but from what I've seen, especially lately, we've been very successful at attracting grant funding. Tim and Joe have attracted quite a lot of funding for decarbonisation schemes, and I know that Steve's working up the Levelling Up Fund bid that we hope to bid for. So we have, and Rob Coggins is always getting grant funding from somewhere. So in my view, I think we have got a good track record. What I have found out more recently, since we've had a new capital accountant who has got knowledge of a few other councils, is that they borrow much more than we have. So I think that our move towards more borrowing will perhaps bring us more in line with other authorities. For your second point about the risk, we do have insurance for our buildings, so you would expect that to be covered. So I've not seen the particular, whether we just put it in just in case the structural damage wasn't covered, but yeah, we do have insurance.
I'm guessing there'll be some excess maybe anyway.
The excess is £10,000.
Just can I just pause there? Sorry, are you having problems hearing,
yeah,
Peter?
Chair. We can't,
Okay.
can't hear at all.
Could you move your mic a bit closer, please, Karen? I'm sorry. I don't really. Do you want to put that back a little bit for what you've just asked, and then? Let her have another go at doing it. Just put your question forward again, Councillor Cruz. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
And then hopefully we'll get there.
I'll say thanks again for the thorough report. So let's get that out there. There were two questions. One was on our ability to attract grant funding, because this capital programme 22-23 is covered, but there is a kind of an indication that we're going to struggle in the future. So I was just trying to understand how we compare to other authorities in terms of attracting grant funding. And then the second question I had was around the structural damage to our assets and whether we've got insurance on our major assets to cover that off. Thank you.
So in terms of the first question, in my view, we've got quite a good history of attracting grant funding. We've received quite a lot of funding for decarbonisation schemes very recently. Over £1 million, I think, was reported at the last council meeting. Rob Coggins, the Director of Housing, has received quite a lot of funding for his schemes. And we're currently working, or Steve Capes and his team are currently going to be working up the Levelling Up Fund bid, for which I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Only today, I believe we were awarded some grant funding for the Change in Place toilet scheme, That's about £64,000, I think. So I think we've got a good track record there. What I have discovered recently, since we had a new capital accountant who's got experience at a couple of other authorities, is that our level of borrowing is perhaps a lot less. Other authorities rely quite a lot more on borrowing to fund their capital programme, whereas we've not done any borrowing for several years. For your second question about risk, yes, we do have insurance for our major buildings, which I would expect to cover structural damage, and the excess is £10,000.
Thanks for the thorough answers. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for going through that again. Councillor Slack, did you have a question? It was just the fact that you couldn't hear me. Okay. Right, okay. Can we obviously, all of us, make sure when we are speaking into the mic, and it gives some of our members a chance of hearing what's going on. Is there anybody else who... Oh, sorry, Councillor Wayne, did you wish to make a question? Put a question.
Yeah. Karen, thanks again for the report. I just need to ask something, and it might be something that's very, very... I should know, but I don't know, or can't bring it to mind at the moment. At 4.2, it says contribution, and it says the authority currently holds 3 retail sites with the intention of generating income. And then it says retail site 1, 2 and 3. Are you able to disclose where they are? And it says with the intention of generating income. When are we likely to anticipate that we will be generating some income? Because that comment shows there's an intention of that. Thank you.
I'd rather not state in public where they are. I can send members details of that in an email. But I can tell you that we've had those sites. We acquired them in 1974 when we came into being, and perhaps it's just the wording's misled you, but they do generate income each year. And the income stated in the table 3. Is it? No, it's not actually. That's the value of them, but they do generate rental income.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot there, but it's just with the intention of generating income. I thought they weren't. So, yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.
Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. It's probably a question for Tim, actually. Mention of the changing places funding. Is Sudbury Hall included in that funding? Thank you.
I can answer that, Chair. It's actually the good work of Becky Bryan and Mike Goldsworthy that's got us saying yes. The answer is yes. I did try and catch your eye because I knew you'd be interested.
Is there anybody else wishing to make any questions? Okay, for that, I'd like to move to debate. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this was very well debated in my meeting last week, and it went through unanimous. Once again, I would like to thank Karen off my committee for all her very hard work, and I'm sure it'll be very successful, so I'm very happy to move the motion. Thank you.
Does that find a seconder? Councillor Cruz, thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any more comments upon this? Councillor O'Brien.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'm very pleased that Karen has now acknowledged in a slightly different way the potential to use prudential borrowing to fund the capital programme. And I would actually like to formalise that. I'll explain why in a moment. I would like to formalise that by way of an amendment to the recommendation. And the amendment would be that in the light of the future constraints on the availability of resources, the next capital strategy report examines the potential for funding the capital programme through potential borrowing. I know Karen has said that's something that they will look to do, but I think it will be helpful if it were formalised. The reason I say that is that clearly there is an issue. I mean, there's an acknowledged issue about how we'll fund the capital programme post-24-25. But I do note that we have currently got a policy which tells us that we will only fund at capital projects through borrowing as a last resort. It is number 7 out of 7 on the mechanisms for funding our programme. That means that although we've got projects such as the solar array in the capital programme, which are going to produce a return, at the moment we are committed to funding those through our savings. That to me is not a terribly sustainable approach, because effectively what it means is rather than having the option as to how to fund our future capital programmes, we're taking a decision now, and it means that if we look to, say, fund a capital project which doesn't produce a return, let's say we want to invest in some capital in some public realm works, we will have no choice but to borrow. So we've got a perverse situation where we're borrowing to fund projects which produce no return, but we're using our savings to fund a project which does produce a return. Now that to me is not a prudent or sustainable way forward. and I think those of you who are in business would accept that borrowing to invest is a prudent way forward. So that's the reason I put that amendment forward, and because I do think we should look seriously at how we fund projects in the programme like the solar array, and not this evening in 2022 commit to funding them in the way that's prioritised in the report. So I'd like to move that amendment, which, as I said, commits us for the next capital programme report to examining the potential to use prudential borrowing.
Karen, have you got any comeback on that for me first?
If that's something that members, if that's something that members want us to look at, we can talk to our investment advisors all in close and undertake that review.
Paul?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think members need to exercise a degree of caution here, because clearly we've got a capital programme which is just over £13 million. And whilst Councillor O'Brien and Karen are absolutely right that there will be occasions when it would make sense for the council to use prudential borrowing to fund some of those schemes, by no means is it likely to be feasible for the capital programme to the extent of £13 million to be funded by borrowing. And I don't think that's necessarily what Councillor O'Brien is suggesting, but the point I'm making is that there will be opportunities where borrowing is appropriate, but there will also be opportunities where borrowing isn't appropriate. And I think you should take the advice of your Section 151 officer, who's clearly advised by the council's advisors as to when it may be appropriate to borrow and when it may not be. I certainly would caution against taking a wholesale approach to borrowing in every instance, or even the majority of instances, because that will have a significant impact on the council's revenue budget.
Chair, if you'd allow me to come back on that, as the Chief Executive has made a point, all I'm saying is that at the moment the strategy we're approving commits us to funding capital projects in a particular way. It doesn't give us an option to borrow, because it sets out a sequential way of providing the funds, and borrowing is the last one of those. If you look at Appendix 2, page 5, it clearly sets out the 7 methods of funding capital projects, and it says that borrowing is the last of those. So at the moment we have no option but to use our reserves. All I'm saying is that there are some projects in the capital programme now, and solar arrays would be one of them. In fact, the Bakewell Road project would have been one of them, because if that produces a 7% return, then you could argue that would be better funded through borrowing. But that's been and gone now. But we have projects in the future programme which, as I said, are producing return. At the moment, we have no option, given the recommendations on the report, to use borrowing to fund them. So what I'm suggesting is that the next report at least examines the option for that, doesn't constrain us in the way that our current policy would do.
So can I just try to gain what you're trying to propose? The recommendation that's set there, but in the future reports that come back on the strategy, you wish that part to be looked at as maybe borrowing money. Is that the gist of what you're trying to put
yes,
in?
That's exactly it, Chair. Looking at the potential for funding projects through prudential borrowing, rather than being constrained by a schedule which says we won't do it basically until we run out of money.
Okay, so in sense, we're accepting the report here with the added bit that next time one comes, there might be that possibility, which I would have thought would be anyway. But would you?
Through you, Chair, just to confirm, the only way this can be an amendment, are you seeking, sorry, Councillor O'Brien, I must clarify the position, are you seeking an amendment to the written policy with that wording in? Because if it's just generally a request, we look at it, it's not really a valid amendment. If you're seeking to amend the policy, then it would be a valid amendment. And I will apologise, I didn't write as quickly to get the exact wording of your amendment, which we'll clarify in a second.
No, sorry, I apologise. I think you're overcomplicating it here. I'm not suggesting we amend the policy. I'm simply adding a recommendation which says that the next capital strategy report examines the potential for funding the capital programme through prudential borrowing.
Yeah, this is where I'm getting slightly confused, because an amendment has to be adding words or taking words away from the original motion. In effect, you're adding a completely new proposition. So if it's not amending the policy, I can't quite see how this is a valid amendment.
Chair, the recommendation is to approve the report. I'm simply saying we approve the report, but we add an amendment that, as I've just read out.
Is there a possibility that this can actually go through as on the recommendation and then take note, the 151 officer is taking note of what your point is, and then maybe that could be put in next time? Is that, Karen, you've obviously got something there in front of you. Go on.
I was just wondering if we could make a slight amendment to the Appendix 2, you know, to not be quite so stringent about the order of the financing. That be acceptable?
If it's amending the policy, then that, because an amendment must refer a matter to appropriate body for consideration, to leave out words and insert other words, or to insert or add words. And I can only see this as an adding a change to the policy, because your motion is to, you know, accept the strategy. So
I think what we could do is, instead of making prudential borrowing number 7, we could make it a separate item on its own, and say prudential borrowing will be used to fund, well, it stands alone actually, used to fund capital investment if the cost of the borrowing is affordable. So if you move item 7 from having to be number 7, sorry, 7 of the 7 there, have it a standalone item, and say prudential borrowing will be used in place of the above 6 financing sources. So insert those words. To fund the capital investment if the cost of borrowing is affordable. We could do that.
if that's acceptable to you, Councillor O'Brien, that amends the policy. So it'd be a case of amending the policy on those words.
I'm just going to bring in Mr. Wilson first.
Yeah, Chair, I was actually going to suggest there might be an easier way of dealing with this, because Councillor O'Brien said that he doesn't have an issue with approving the current policy, but when this comes back next time round, he would like different consideration to be given to the means of financing, which wouldn't be in a strict hierarchical order. So one way of dealing with this is to actually approve recommendation 1, but to have a second recommendation to say that when the corporate investment strategy for what will then be 23-24 is prepared, that consideration be given to the means of funding, which would include prudential borrowing. I think that would deal with the issue that Councillor O'Brien is looking to address, but I'm sure he'll correct me if I'm wrong.
So it's future years. Councillor O'Brien, do you want to just make your point?
No, that's what I
Right, that's what
proposed.
that's what you're quite
using
happy.
Slightly different words.
Yeah. Okay. So we've gone around the houses. Okay. Councillor Salt, did you? Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. On page 57, the Council continued to bid for capital grants with the opportunity arises. With the developing economic situation where capital grants will be harder to get, isn't it a time that the Council look to introducing SIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy, to what will be a genuine fund to finance affordable housing and other infrastructure programmes. So should we be looking again at introducing SIL, and like many councils have?
You want to come on to that, Mike? Although,
Chair, I'll deal with that one. Councillor Slack will recall that we have been down the route of looking at the introduction of SIL a few years ago.
Yeah.
And there is a sort of an extended process that we have to go through to demonstrate that if we do introduce SIL, it has no impact upon the viability of development. We got to the point, if you recall, previously where we had agreed that we would go down the route of SIL. We took some additional advice from consultants, and the consultants said at that particular point in time, the costs of development and the changes in the cost of development against the changes in the values of new development made it such that it wasn't appropriate for Derbyshire Dales to move forward with it. But the recommendation and the resolution from Council at that time was also that if the circumstances arose that SIL did seem to become a viable option, then we would look at that again. At this moment in time, there's no evidence to suggest that it's still that position.
Just to come back, Mike, just to say that the changing economic situation may alter it in the next year or so, but something we should be looking at next year. Yeah.
If the circumstances change and it's seen to be appropriate, then there is no reason why we can't do that. But at the moment, there is no indications from the advice we're getting that the circumstances have changed sufficiently to give us the headroom to be able to sort of go down the route of introducing SIL.
Thank you.
is this a question, Councillor Cruz? Sorry.
No, I was just following up on
Okay, I'm just going to go back to Councillor O'Brien. After everything that we've been considered, you, as Mr Wilson said, and how I perceive what you're saying, you agree with the strategy that is, but wish to put in a second recommendation on top of what's already there, that we accept what there is, but in the future we can look at the barrowing in a different light. Is that what you'd like to do? And if that's the case, does that find a seconder? Councillor Cruz. Okay. Does everybody understand that? I know it's a bit confusing, but I think it has been stated, and I think in Karen's report in some aspects, she has said there might be a time when we need to look into barrowing. So putting that in as a recommendation, as a second recommendation on top of this, I think is quite adamant. So anybody else wishing to make any more comments upon that?
Yeah, can we just confirm with Mr Wilson what the wording that he used so that we can make sure we're voting on the correct amendment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My suggestion, having listened to the debate, is that there's a second recommendation to the effect that in proposing a revised capital strategy for 2023-24, consideration be given to the means and priority of financing used.
Is everybody understanding in that what's trying to be proposed?
So, Chair, you need to vote on the amendment.
We're going to, Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Cruz proposed this to add in the second recommendation in as stated by by Mr. Wilson, just. So can we have a vote, all in favour? A show of hands. Against? Six. Where is it? Abstentions? Okay. Then that's been, the amendment is put forward. So now we go back to the substantive amendment proposal of just the recommendation 1, which was proposed by Councillor Donnelly and seconded by Councillor Cruz. So we go to the vote on that now, please. All in favour of just having the recommendation to take the report without adding the second recommendation in?
Sorry, Chair, could we have the result of that first vote?
Chair, the vote was around 17 for, 5 against. Sorry, 6 against.
In that case, Chair, isn't it the procedure that then becomes a substantive recommendation?
Yes,
and we don't...
So it's a substantive motion. Now you're voting on the amendment and the first... Well,
Oh, sorry, beg me pardon. Beg me pardon. Yeah, we're all getting confused on this. Right, okay, so we are now not going back to the very beginning. So we're going to the one that we've just voted on, again, now being the substantive motion, we'll get it right eventually, of Councillor O'Brien and seconded by Paul Cruz as regards the recommendation 1 as stipulated on the report, with the second as regards maybe looking into things in the future policy. All in favour, please show. Against? 6. Abstentions? Then that's carried. Thank you. We've got there in the end. Can I ask you don't put any more amendments up, Mr. O'Brien? Or let me know prior. Be more helpful. Okay. Item 11, the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. So clearly there's a link between the last report and this one, because the size of your capital programme and the need to borrow and so on impacts your Treasury activities. The SIP for Code of Practice on Treasury Management requires the Council to approve a Treasury Management strategy before the start of each year. At this Council, monitoring of that strategy is then carried out mid-year and at the end of the year by the Governance and Resources Committee. So the Council invests substantial amounts of money on the markets, and it's therefore exposed to financial risks, which could include the loss of invested funds and the revenue effect of changing interest rates. Now, at the moment, interest rates on borrowing are going up, so that will generate us more income, so it's favouring us at the moment. A Treasury Management strategy is therefore essential to assist in the identification, monitoring and control of risk. And you'll see, if you read the strategy, it does things like mean that we don't put all our eggs in one basket, and that each basket has a limit to the amount that we'll put in it. It also means that we look at things like liquidity, so that we don't invest for fixed term and then can't get access to our money when we need it. With regard to the external context mentioned in the early parts of the report, there have been some changes in the last couple of weeks since I wrote the report. At its meeting on the 16th of March, the Monetary Policy Committee did increase interest rates again, bank rates, so they increased them from 0.5% to 0.75%, which we expected in the report. And our advisors are in close, their view is that there'll be another increase to 1% in May. The report indicates inflation was expected to peak at 7.25% in April, but I saw reports this morning in the media that are now talking about inflation hitting 9% later this year. So that's a concern in terms of our revenue budget. But I'm asking members to approve this Treasury Management Strategy Statement and the Prudential Indicators for 22-23. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Questions? Then we're moving to debate. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No comment. I'm quite happy to move this report.
Seconder. Councillor Atkin.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to second this, and as always, Karen, very good report.
Anybody else wishing to make any comments? No, I'll go to the vote. All in favour, please show. Unanimous? Against? Say it just for the sake. Abstentions? There. That was carried. Thank you. Turn back on. Item 12. Localism Act Pay Policy Statement. Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The Council does have a legal responsibility to publish annually a pay policy statement. This statement relates to the period 21-22. It is actually presented to members late because the annual pay settlement for local government employees was only agreed a matter of weeks ago. So the proposal is to approve the 21-22 statement, despite the fact that we are pretty much at the end of the financial year, but then to give authority to publish the 22-23 pay policy statement once the local government settlement for the 22-23 financial year is agreed, which is likely to be some considerable months away. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions? Good. And I will move to proposal. Councillor Finesse.
Yes, I will propose recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
I'll second, Chair.
Councillor Donnelly, you're seconding. Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any more comments upon this? Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. I did go back to Deborah about some further information on this report relating to the number of employees and the gender split above grade 14, because I was really pleased to see the press release about celebrating International Women's Day and the gender split of management grades above grade 10. But I was interested to see what the gender split was above grade 14, and it's very low. So there are 6 employees in the organisation who are male above grade 14 and only 1 female. And it's just a general comment really to say that there is obviously some sort of glass ceiling above that level in the organisation. And it will be good, considering there's some recruitment coming up, that maybe that might be broken a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to comment on that?
Well,
sorry, that was a comment.
Oh,
I'm entering into a debate about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, then fine. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a very straightforward comment to the effect that it's not just pay policies that, of course, that we need to be reviewing every so often, but also the conditions and working environment within the management structure. We've spoken about this many times. I know that my colleague over this side of the House, as it were, Steve Flitter, has mentioned it on any number of occasions about being aware of that. So just to put that on record, as it were, not just about pay, it's about how we treat the senior officers and make the job as not easy as possible. We don't want to give them a too easy time, obviously, but I see Tim smiling. But that we facilitate the best outcomes for this council.
Thank you, Councillor Ratcliffe. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. We're just experiencing now probably the worst standard of living decline since the 1950s. We're going to see inflation roaring ahead, and people are going to be left behind. I think we should be very, very careful what we're doing now and monitor pay levels. We don't want our employees to fall behind and add to the desperate situation the country's in at the moment. I've never, in my lifetime, I've never seen it in such a bad state economy with roaring inflation and standard of living falling so rapidly. It's unbelievable. So I think we've got to keep this in perspective and address this situation if we see it getting worse. Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any more comments? With that, it has been proposed, the recommendation set out before you, recommendation 1, as taking the annual policy and approve it for 21-22, and then obviously for 22-23 to be settled as and when that comes forward. All in favour? Against? Abstentions? And that's carried. Thank you. Item 13, Vision Derbyshire Climate Change Strategy 22-25. Tim, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Ratcliffe commented about me smiling, and I think that in part was because I knew I was up next. The report before you is asking you to approve a strategy for working together across Derbyshire in relation to climate change. In particular, the strategy looks at community emissions rather than the council's own emissions. We have our own strategy that looks at how we deal with our own carbon footprint from our own operations. This is more about how councils can work together across the piece to help individuals, businesses, households, travel, transport, all reduce their emissions around the district. It's badged up as a Vision Derbyshire project because it's being held under that banner, but in reality, I imagine members know that officers do work together on all kinds of things across the district, whether that be planning or environmental health or finance or economic development. In this particular case, climate change was one of a couple of areas that was identified by the Vision Derbyshire project to be badged up under that banner to encourage councils to work together. What this does is it introduces quite a high-level strategy, a series of headlines, if you like, of the kind of areas that councils think they can work together on to add value to the work of individual councils. And in particular, and I've got to remember these as I go forward now, they're looking at strengthening the low-carbon economy, decarbonising housing. As you know, we have quite an effective programme of works on that already. We're better than some councils in the area and on a par with others, you know, and we want to share that experience and make sure that we can help as many people around Derbyshire as possible whilst reducing carbon emissions. It looks at sustainable transport, travel and infrastructure and waste and resources. And obviously I know waste and resources is an issue that members are very interested in at the moment. These are headlines within a strategy. They're not backed up at this stage by a detailed action plan, and the group recognises that's something it needs to move on to. And those actions will be brought to the attention of members as we go forward with that. But in particular, what this report looks to do is to ask you to consider and hopefully approve this strategy ahead of it being approved by the Vision Derbyshire mechanism itself, by the Joint Committee of Vision Derbyshire. The idea is that each individual member gets the opportunity to look at the strategy and comment upon it and hopefully approve it before that goes forward. In wrapping this all up, I will say that the strategy has been seen at a couple of points by the Climate Change Working Group, and any comments that the group have made have been fed back into the Vision Derbyshire group to enable them to amend the strategy. Some of those comments have been acted upon in informing this.
Thank you. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do agree with you, Tim. Vision Derbyshire, some of the policies aren't very good, but this is good. This is good where we're working on climate change together, and I fully support this, and I'd like to move it straight away, Chair. I think it's a good scheme, and it'll only improve climate change emergency.
Did I take it that you would like to move it?
Pardon?
Did I take it that you like to move this?
Move it, Chair, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that is taken. Does that find a seconder before we move to question, carrying on. Councillor Buttle. That nicely brings you in, Councillor Buttle, if you'd like to make some comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really welcome this. I think it's absolutely great. There's lots of buzzwords, and I'm really hoping that they actually turn into reality, because we've just got so many great things in there. It's really, really good. There's one thing that really caught my eye, which was page 111, section 6, bullet point 4. You know, exciting stuff. Adopting practices in farming which will improve soil sequestration. You know, that is the sort of thing where we could end up being carbon negative in Derbyshire. Just really quite exciting stuff. Just one little line that's in there. There's so much stuff there that we could make a real difference with. And I'm a massive fan of joined up government as well. So if it all comes together, then I really do welcome it. And I'm very happy to second it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Peter O'Brien, Councillor O'Brien, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Bullchair. I'll combine my question and comment. So my question is relates to section 3 of the strategy, and I think it goes to the heart of the relationship between Vision Derbyshire and the local authorities. Section 3 says a range of activities and strategies will be identified and delivered collaboratively by the councils between 2022 and 2025. So my question is, how is it intended that members of this council will be engaged in that process of defining those actions? That's my question. My points are that it's very unfortunate that the Peak District National Park is not party to this strategy. And I think that means when you look at the headlines that unfortunately for a third of the district, we aren't going to be able to deliver these wonderful ambitions. So I don't know why the park are not involved, but I do hope that those in power will make it clear that, well, will do their best to address that, because I think we can celebrate it, but unfortunately it means a third of the district is not going to be able to benefit from the ambitions in this strategy. The other point I want to make is on section 7, which is about communication and engagement, and there's a laudable objective here to give all individuals and groups the opportunity to shape how this challenge is addressed. But what's missing from this whole strategy is any public involvement. And that's again is an issue with Vision Derbyshire type documents. They're produced, they're agreed by councils, but there is no semblance of any public engagement. And I'd be interested to hear views on other colleagues of that. As we pride ourselves on engaging with the public, and this strategy says that we will give individuals the opportunity to shape the strategy, but we don't see it necessary to consult with them on the strategy itself. I find this a very strange approach to working collaboratively. But I would appreciate an answer to the question on how it's intended that members of this council will be engaged on identifying the actions we're actually going to take over the next 3 years.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I made a note of that. I think I got it down. In the first instance here, we have the Climate Change Working Group, and it would be I'm the representative who sits on this group on behalf of this council. It would be my intention to bring action plans and project plans back through the Climate Change Working Group for discussion and comment. Some of those will be, well, none of them will be minor, but some of those will be fairly straightforward. Others may very well require approval. I would suggest formal approval at Council or Community and Environment Committee, in which case we'll bring those forward. But the first protocol will be the Climate Change Working Group.
Thank you. Councillor Archer, question?
Thank you, Chair. Sort of a comment on the question. Really welcome this. So anything that's going to raise the profile of climate change, make it a higher priority, has got to be a good thing. I know we're not yet at the point of detail on how it's going to actually impact in real terms, but I wonder if there's any sort of idea about how it might work in real terms. Maybe we can look at a case study, such as the air quality issue in Ashbourne at the moment, which is, I'm not convinced the current plans are going to have an impact on that. And how would we potentially see this new development, this new policy, working in practice to try and address that and make sure that practical measures to address the issues of air quality in Buxton Hill area of Ashbourne are actually brought forward? Can we see how that might work yet? If not, can we make it a sort of case study that we can look into it and maybe let us know the sort of things that this group can do to try and take that forward in a bit more practical way?
I can come back on that a little bit. One of the areas of work that we're looking at, I'll come back to the point about the air quality management area, but one of the areas we're looking at is decarbonisation of housing. And there is an intention to produce a series of case studies, and at the moment a subgroup of this group, so a couple of councils, we are one of them, are working with each other to try and look at a way we can be more, we can bring in even more funding, and we can not only help fund those that qualify for it, but we can provide a kind of one-stop shop for those that don't qualify for that funding, but nevertheless will benefit from the advice and expertise that's been built up so far. That work's ongoing, and when we get there, that will be published. So we'll make that available. In relation to air quality, the air quality management area in Ashbourne is not declared specifically in relation to climate change issues. So I always feel I need to make this point. It's a health-related issue, and that's why that area was declared. However, the cause of that pollution in that area is clearly road traffic, which does have an impact on climate change, and it's one of the areas included in here in relation to transport, travel and infrastructure. Certainly I'll ask for that to be considered along with the other air quality management areas that exist in Derbyshire.
Thank you for that. Councillor Finesse, question?
No, it's not a question, Chair. It's just a response to Councillor O'Brien's statement about Peak Park. Is that okay? Yeah. The Vision Derbyshire, as I understand it, is just for local councils. Peak Park hasn't been invited to join. But we do have our own strategy. And we have a panel, of which I'm a member, which regularly discusses climate change and how it can be affected. So I think it's a bit unfair to sort of blame people for not being part of this, because they have not been invited. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ratcliffe, question, comment?
Yes, a question,
thank you.
Chair, and thank you for bringing me in. I'm very taken with the number of questions that residents put in this evening that I have, that I acknowledge have some place in the debate and questioning on this particular agenda item. Tim is a very hard-working officer who I'm sure we couldn't put this into better hands, and I'm sure it will have good outcomes in achieving the end result that we all want from that motion that we adopted on climate emergency a number of years ago now. However, I'd like to ask this question of Tim, if I may. Given some of those questions, the content of them, and the item that we're going to be considering in a moment or two, does he not feel that there is very much a growing apprehension that our climate change strategies are going to be undermined by what is taking place within the local plan in terms of housing numbers, to my mind, that are being put forward without sufficient robust policies to see that they can form and contribute to climate change. I would have thought it would have been taken within the context of this climate change strategy that all new houses should be net zero, that we should accelerate retrofitting, that we should adopt low carbon heating where possible, and we should adopt micro energy generation on homes where that is available. Given that, I don't see the policies within our planning framework that are really pushing that forward. So I have the same apprehensions as those questioners that sent in their comments this evening, and really, I think, have received responses that I don't think are sufficient in detail, and I don't think are really addressing their concerns. I'll make that comment, I think, because I think it's justified. But I'd like to hear what Tim has to say, because I know you'll give me a very reasoned answer.
Thank you, Chair. Well, another of the very hard-working officers of the Council is, of course, Mike Hayes, who will be speaking shortly, and he knew I was going to say something like that. Yeah. In addition to the climate change working group on which I sit, part of Vision Derbyshire, there's another group looking at planning and climate change, which Mike represents us on, and that is looking at how planning policies can be maximised and the local plan can be maximised to help tackle the climate change issues. I don't know, Mike, whether you want to say anything at this point.
Tim's right, Councillor Ratcliffe. You know, I do sit on a planning and climate change working group, which is mainly made up of officers, and we've been looking at sort of how we can develop best practice and policy for sort of taking forward interlocal plans across the Derbyshire area that's covered by Vision Derbyshire. That work is still ongoing at the moment, so we're not really at that position yet where we can say to members here or members at other authorities that we've got that particular position cracked yet in terms of our policy approach. In terms of the responses we've given to members of the public in the report, in the sort of public participation section earlier in the agenda, you know, we are as officers fully committed to making sure that we can deliver on your aspirations as members representing the local community in terms of the mitigation measures that we need to put in place through the policies in the local plan for delivering on climate change. Those will come forward in due course. We're just not at that position yet to be able to sort of say to you what those are at this moment in time.
I thank you for the answer, Mike, and I do appreciate that things develop through conversation and things like this, and the questions and debate that we engage in. But I'll just remind you, and I'm sure you don't need reminding, that I sent you what I thought was a very, very pertinent SPD document that shows that authorities do have the powers, if they'll accept them, of almost mandating that these actions are taken. You know, you're not leaving it to the developers to make their minds up about this. You're saying to them, this is what we want. And generally speaking, it has been found that the developers will follow on this. They maybe will up their market prices, but the public will accept that because they know they're not going to have to make those investments at a later date. They're getting the package, if you like, at the beginning. So I'm still a committed advocate of this sort of a move. But I know you're listening, Mike, and that's all I ask.
Councillor Ratcliffe, yes, I am listening, and I have read through that document that you sent through and other documents other members have sent through. And all of those will be put into the mix in terms of the way in which we develop the policies to be taken forward into the local plan. And if you recall, what I have also said to members, particularly at the local plan working group, is that we need to make sure that the policies that we bring forward in the local plan are appropriate to Derbyshire Dales, and they're not necessarily ones that we bring in wholesale from elsewhere, which is completely inappropriate for our particular circumstances.
Thank you for that. Councillor Gamble, comment, question?
I actually had a couple of questions, but one of them I think at least has been answered. Just as a follow-up on Councillor O'Brien's point about the engagement, at what point in Vision Derbyshire are other people, other than just direct councillors and officers, going to be engaged? I'm just thinking the point Councillor Buttle made about sequestration of farmland. Have they started talking to representatives from the farming community, for example, on that yet?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, in relation to community engagement, I agree with your comment, actually, Councillor Gamble and Councillor O'Brien. It is something we need to be better at. From our own point of view, you all know Joe Hill, who's working with us on this. Joe's making a lot of effort to try and get out and about around the community. You might be aware of some of the work she's done in relation to the local markets with the Fantastic Homes exhibition. We've also engaged March's Energy Agency to do some active community engagement on our behalf to find out what people do want. That work's ongoing. In relation to the farming community, it's a very pertinent question because Councillor Purdy did, in fact, ask Joe and I to take part in a debate with various representatives at the Agricultural Business Centre in the very near future. I don't think we've got a date for that yet, but that could very well be the start of a conversation. It's also an area that we welcome further conversation with the Peak Park on, I think. It's obviously it's a key partner in respect of that particular issue. As regards Vision Derbyshire's own community engagement, that's something that we haven't covered in discussions yet, but I'll certainly take back into the group.
Hopefully that'll be a two-way process with asking people what it is they want. I think the worst thing you can do in these situations sometimes is just, sit somewhere and decide what should happen to people and then tell them what should happen. I'm hoping this is going to be a two-way process.
Certainly that's the way we're doing it ourselves at the moment, very much trying to find out what people would like and seeing what it is we can deliver against. Some of the things people would like, we as a council probably can't deliver against, but some we can.
And do you intend to ask Peak Park to be part of this? Because obviously they are a major local authority.
It's not in my or our gift individually to invite Peak Park to this particular table with the Vision Derbyshire group. However, we will, as a council, we will certainly talk to them, and we do talk to them about climate change issues. Another area Mike's involved in is looking at their policy development in that. Joe's been involved in that as well. So we do engage with them wherever we can.
Thank you. Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair. It's really, I just felt compelled to raise a counterpoint to Councillor Ratcliffe's very good points, but I have to sort of say that I hope I'm not speaking out of term here, but the majority of the councillors in this room, maybe not all, but certainly I don't include myself in this, might own their own homes, might have the luxury of owning their own homes. There's a lot of people who can't afford to buy homes in Derbyshire Dales, and we need to be mindful that we strike a balance. If we make properties far too expensive, young people won't be able to get on the housing ladder. And whilst I agree there is a balance that we have to make with, putting forward good, sound environmental policies, but we also need to be mindful that the Derbyshire Dales is a unique place. It is more expensive to build housing here, and we have to be mindful that we don't price the young. And I have to include myself in this. I'm 46 and I can't afford a home in Derbyshire Dales. I live in rented. And I know there's a heck of a lot of people out there who are in that similar situation. So we just need to be mindful of that. So all it was a counterpoint to your good points, Councillor Ratcliffe. I agree with you, but we just need to be mindful of that. Sorry to...
Thank you. Okay, we are on Vision Derbyshire's climate. Councillor Slack, you did propose it, and I'm going to let you come back and have
Chair?
your final words. Thank you.
Right. On moving this, I was under the impression that this was bringing Vision Derbyshire into it, but now Councillor Ratcliffe has, where I've already said previously that our local plan isn't sufficient, that our local plan is very weak and we should have more renewable energy. I've said that previous, but I was under the impression that this wasn't a part of that.
No, it isn't. I think we got off the beaten track.
I think our local plan's too weak. And
Item
it should be more
14.
in
Item
renewable
14 is more about the local plan.
Yeah. So
Councillor Burford, I see
correct.
that you had.
Correct in moving it then.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Councillor Slack.
Thank you.
If
we're in debate or questions now, but
Right, I'll make it clear now. We're going into debate.
well, yeah,
Thank
well, you.
you.
I'll make my question part of the debate in that case. Then. First of all, which is a question actually, I would like to echo what Councillor Wayne said at the start of the meeting about all these questions we've received tonight, both from members, including himself, and several residents. We've got about 8 sides of questions and answers here. We can't possibly do them justice in the short time that we've had, really. I mean, we could have done with them a few days ago. Can this be looked into by officers so that perhaps we can deal with this in a more efficient way in future? Because there's very pertinent points made both on climate change and on particularly the local plan, of course. So in terms of climate change, just going through the recommendations, it's a very laudable report, certainly, and the aims and objectives are certainly something that most people are going to support. On page 108, 5.3, it's been mentioned by other members, decarbonising Derbyshire's housing. Yes, there's a very laudable vision there, but the local plan obviously needs to, as Mike has told us, need to look at planning policies and how they can be, some of them perhaps made mandatory, but I take Councillor Bright's point about affordability, but I think you've got to look at economies of scale. I think if every new development or every developer building new houses was forced to make houses as carbon neutral as possible with full range of renewables, I'm sure the extra cost of that would be fairly minimal if it was done throughout Derbyshire Dales, throughout Derbyshire County, because of economies of scale, make them far more competitive. So that's something that I strongly recommend that we look at in probably the local plan working party and other Vision Derbyshire looks at this as well throughout the county, because we need to act probably in concert with neighbouring authorities if possible. But another thing that occurs to me is, and it's something for the county council, I should have asked Sue about this, she could have perhaps pursued it through the county council, but I think I'm conscious of the fact that the county council seems to be replacing all the old street lighting with LED lighting, but it seems to be, certainly where we live, it seems to be about 1 in 4 that's replaced, and probably because of financial constraints, they can't do them all. But I think they've got to do the whole of the county must be surely replaced with LED lighting as soon as possible. But just an aside, really, it's a bit ironic that both Sainsbury's in Matlock keep the lights on all night and more or less illuminates the sky above Matlock. And the bus station waiting room, which we own, has the lights on every night, and it's been closed for about 2 years, so that's another thought. I think something should be done about that. It can't be beyond the wit of man to turn lights off that are left on all night in a council property. So, in other words, I think all new houses should be net zero as far as possible through planning policy and guidance in the future. And 5.4, page 109, sustainable transport, and something that Councillor Archer has mentioned, air quality improvement. That's got to be a priority, I think, and shift obviously to electric vehicles will improve that. And we need to provide more charging points, as I've said before. The charging point infrastructure is inadequate at the moment, up and down the country, not just in the Dales. So we've got to increase, obviously, the modal share of active transport, as it says in this document, walking and cycling, but that's okay in the southern parts of the Dales and southern parts of the county where you haven't got the topography we've got here in Derbyshire Dales. But it all hinges on reducing car use by removing unsustainable residential development and incentivising sustainable travel. So we've got to be careful we don't just use rhetoric on this and popular sound bites that we hear up and down the country. It's got to be something that's practical in our fairly diverse landscape and topography. Page 110, 5.5, waste and resources. I think the priority there is to, as we must agree, to reduce the amount of household and commercial waste that's going to landfill and divert it from that and increase recycling and reuse of waste. So we need, again, collaboration with neighbouring authorities to make sure that happens. Green and food waste, that's been obviously discussed a few times recently in this council. So the processing of it needs to be improved. And so we need solutions for that, obviously in discussion with neighbouring authorities as well. Page 111, section 6, carbon offsetting and sequestration. Yes, I agree with that entirely. And it does say in the report, especially trees, woodlands and vegetation, which absorbed in 2019 apparently 0.13 million tonnes of CO2 out of 7.2 million tonnes annual emissions across the county. So we must surely increase tree cover, and because we're going to lose so many trees through ash dieback in the near future that we will be running fast to stand still in terms of tree planting in this county, or in this district, particularly this part of the county. So, and it also mentioned increasing green spaces and tree coverage in towns. Well, you know, to be honest, I've not seen many trees planted in any towns in this district for many years now. Part of the town centre scheme in Matlock included about half a dozen trees, but apart from that, I've not seen any new trees planted in Matlock, apart from what have been planted by, well, certainly Matlock Town Council in the past and individuals who have campaigned for them. So that's something else we've got to look at very seriously, I think. Councils are working to develop a natural capital and biodiversity strategy, but, you know, as my wife would say, we seem to have an excess of strategies on all councils at the moment, and there's just a lack of practical action. I think we've got to come up with practical ideas and solutions. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. Very complex. It has been proposed and seconded on the Vision Derbyshire Climate Change Strategy. Anybody else wishing to make any more comments? Then I'm going to the vote. All in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much for that. Item 14, Derbyshdale's local plan. Next steps. Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to remind members that the meeting of council that we held on the 19th of January resolved to excuse me, to complete the review of the local plan. But the resolution also said that we would be looking at the more detailed aspects of the sort of schedule of changes that we needed to make to the plan, following on from that resolution. And essentially what we've got before you this evening is the first part of that process, where we're looking at, in a little bit more detail, the sort of issues that are around housing needs and housing supply for the period up to 2040. One of the things I need to sort of make clear in opening really is that the report doesn't make any recommendations about what the future housing levels should be at this moment in time, nor does it make any recommendations about what sites should be allocated within the local plan. That is something that will come through the local plan working group and back to council in the future. So we're not here to debate the merits, if you like, of the sites or the merits of the numbers. It's around the process that we've gone through so far and the next steps we need to take the local plan forward. The report sort of sets out, as you can see in it, that we've looked at the evidence in relation to housing need and in the future, and there's 4 potential scenarios that have been identified by the consultants that have been working for us on that. We've also been looking at the housing supply side of it through the call for sites process and the strategic housing land availability assessment work that's gone on in parallel to that. Bringing those two, the report seeks to try and bring those two aspects together, and tries to sort of give members a picture of where we are at this moment in time in terms of the assessment work that we've done behind the scenes in looking at whether or not the actual supply side of what's been coming forward can actually meet those aspirations that we've got through the corporate plan and through our economic plan and also through our COVID recovery plan in terms of the sort of levels of growth that we've identified in the sort of scenarios we've got on housing need. And as you can see in the report, what we've got to the conclusions is that essentially we are able to potentially get to a point with the level of supply that's been coming forward to meet the standard methodology. The standard methodology is the very minimum that the government would like us to achieve. The local plan working group and officers are of the view that the standard methodology and the baseline growth scenarios aren't necessarily those scenarios that match the aspirations which we've set out for ourselves through the corporate plan and through the economic development plan and our COVID recovery plan. And as a result of that, we are
recommending to you this evening that actually we need to do some more work to try and look at developing future options that sees whether or not actually there is the potential to get closer to those high levels of growth that we've identified in the report. I'm not going to say to you tonight that is going to happen. We're going to be able to achieve that. That's something we want to investigate over the course of the next 12 months or so, by looking at, appointing some consultants to help us out in doing that particular piece of work. The consequence of the piece of work that we're asking members to sign off tonight would be to delay the preparation of the sort of consultation, or the first page of consultation on the plan, and the subsequent then processes we'd need to go through to get the plan on the books and replace the adopted plan we've got at the moment. If you recall, the actual my laptop is beginning to freeze, but the report we initially presented to members at council back in November 2020 saw the potential adoption of the plan somewhere in the middle of next year. We're now anticipating that will be then possibly shifted back down to the back end of 2024, the year after. This gives us enough time then to really give a really good detailed consideration of what options are available to us going forward. There are a couple of points I just want to raise in relation to the details of the report before I sort of happily answer any questions. Firstly is in relation to a site that's included within the schedule in the appendices, and that's the site at Northwood Recreation Ground. It's a site which has been made aware to us as officers that has been looked at as a potential sort of wildflower meadow as part of the biodiversity project, at the same time as being identified as a potential housing site. Given that a lot of work has been invested so far on the development of the sort of wildflower meadow side of things, and the expectation is with the local community that's likely to take place in the very near future, any development that would come forward on that site, which is anticipated to probably be about 20 units, is likely to actually undermine any initial work on that. What we're suggesting is that probably we need to go back to the Estates Department and discuss with them the withdrawal of that site from this particular schedule, so that then we don't end up in a situation where our work and the reputation of the District Council and the work we've done on that side of things in terms of the wildflower meadow is undermined. The second bit I'd want to point out is in paragraph 3.13, we've identified that the detailed assessment will be published and made available to members on the members portal and on the website. We too as officers have been affected by COVID. We've had a couple of technological issues with the system we've been using on, so we haven't yet been in a position to publish those detailed assessments, and we're now anticipating we'll be able to do that before Easter. It doesn't change our position in relation to the assessment work that we've done so far. All it is doing is basically putting all of the assessment work that we've done into one document and making that public available and therefore available for members of the public and members to look at going forward. I don't think there's any more I need to add on this report, and I'm happy to answer any particular questions members might have.
Thank you for that. Councillor Burford, please, question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got 3 questions, I think. In terms of option 5 approach, I think in the report, Mike has got allocated housing land and considering a new village, and saying that the comment is that this would delay the revised local plan preparation by 9 to 12 months. But at the same time, if you look at the original timetable for the local plan preparation, I think we're going to have the draft available next month. And now it's been put forward by a year anyway to May 23 up to towards the end of 2024. So in view of that change, and that's called a milestone, by the way, not a timetable for some reason, but in view of that, can I ask why it's going to delay it by that much, and why is that a serious matter in view of the fact that the timetable has been extended anyway?
Chair, I think it's just a matter of the practicalities of being able to get to the point where we've appointed consultants, and the consultants have been able to undertake a detailed assessment of what options might be available to us, looking at and identifying whether there are additional areas of land that we haven't been made aware of so far, and being able to do a thorough analysis of those sites, so that we can get to a point where we can determine whether or not we can deliver on any of those other scenarios that we've identified to us going forward. It's just really a matter of saying how long will it take us to do that piece of work based upon our experience of commissioning consultants, getting the work done, and then getting them to report back, and then reporting it back to members. So it's really just the practicalities of that.
Well, the second question is, I'm wondering, in view of especially what Karen's told us tonight about anticipated 9% inflation later this year, what difference do you think do officers think will the present unprecedented level of inflation make in terms of housing demand? It's going to be obviously exacerbated by the appalling impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine as well, of course. And the only thing I can think of, the only impact I can think of, is that so many families are going to be desperate for, well, obviously with the energy price increases as well, are so desperate for housing, or moving from, perhaps downsizing from a 4-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom house, whatever it might be, that the demand is going to be for more affordable properties, not less. So, and so we surely must be looking at developments or mandating developments of smaller properties to try to help these hard-pressed families.
Yeah, Chair, the point that Councillor Burfoot is making is around demand for housing, and what Councillor Burfoot is referring to is, in essence, is the operation of the housing market. What I have said in this chamber and elsewhere is that the local plan is about meeting needs going forward. That is different to the operation of the housing market. And the operation of the housing market is dictated by supply and demand, costs and values. The fact is that as a planning authority, we need to be addressing what our future needs are. The operation of the market will adjust itself over a period of time. It will have an impact upon the delivery of housing over time, but essentially it is the need aspect that we need to be focusing on. The market will adjust itself over time. If the house builders can't sell the houses at the prices they think they want to sell them at, then they will have to adjust their prices to sell them. And that's the fundamental difference between what we've got to do in the local plan and what will happen on the ground.
Thank you. The third question, last question, is, you'd be pleased to know, the national park effect. I think we dwell too much on trying to get the national park to allow more housing. I think even if they double the numbers, it won't make that much difference to our demands outside the national park. So can we lobby, and I note, in fact, I looked very briefly at what Michael replied to, I think, John Ewart's question about the South Downs National Park, but can we lobby our MP to join the Conservative MP for Hampshire East, that's Damien Hines, who is campaigning against the housing demands of the government, despite about 57% of his, with his constituency or district, I'm not sure, district presumably, being out in the South Downs National Park. Obviously, it's something which is we've been talking about for several years now, but we don't seem to get any consistent response from the government. Even the letter from the minister, was it Mr. Pincham, I think, to the leader, that doesn't seem to explain much, certainly in terms of consistency, as far as I can see.
Chair, as officers, we will continue to try and lobby the national park to try and encourage them to facilitate more development within the national park. We have a need to enter into a dialogue with them as a formal dialogue through the duty to cooperate and agree a position with them. At this moment in time, the indications are that that position isn't going to necessarily change significantly, and it would need a significant policy change at national level to encourage the national park to change their approach. But you know, we can continue to have that dialogue. We continue to push and pressure them
through whatever means. And that could well be, you know, discussions between members, as we've already had. It could also be at an officer level, and it can also be at a sort of a high level, political level. But as you'll see from the letter that Councillor Purdy's had back from, you know, Mr. Pincher, the inference from government is essentially that they see that valued landscapes have a significant role to play in terms of the influence that they play on the delivery of housing. So, you know, I think to be honest, we are fighting an uphill battle in trying to persuade them to deliver significant amounts. And what you said is quite right. Even if we went from, say, 20 units a year to 40 units a year, that wouldn't make a significant dent in terms of our sort of needs elsewhere within the district.
So we've just gone back briefly. So therefore, shouldn't we be concentrating on the actual numbers that are demanded of this district and other districts like Hampshire East, rather than trying to get the National Park to build 10 times more houses than they're building at the moment?
The fundamental sort of principle that we you know, in terms of the approach that's been taken is that the way in which the housing numbers are sort of calculated is on a district-wide basis, and that is very, very difficult to be able to disaggregate down between the local planning authority area and the national park area. And to do that would involve some very complicated calculations, and there's no guarantee that those would be wholly accurate. There has been work done in the past, but it really hasn't stood much of a test in terms of, you know, the ability to say actually that's a right proportion in the park and that proportion outside the park.
Thank you. Councillor Wade, question?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I've got 3 questions because it's something that I think is very important. So if you'll bear with me, please, I'll be as quickly as I can. Derbyshire Dales residents within the local plan area, at least, recognise that higher levels of development over the last 3 years have caused significant increases in flooding, human waste flowing into our streets, and even more congested roads and poorer air quality. They are the people who live and work in these areas. They're the people who they know what they want from these areas in which we live, and the work they should be consulted at the earliest possible stage, in my opinion. I do feel strongly, with some of the wording in the report, that we've discussed tonight about consultation and how important it is. We mustn't lose sight that we are working on behalf of our communities, and it is paramount that we act in the best interests of our communities. And even Mr. Pincher, in his letter, that comes up shortly, he says councils and their committees are best placed to take decisions on local plans, right? But we choose, and I don't know why, but we're choosing to delay consultation with members of our community till October 2023, as I read the report. Now, what is the point of consulting with the public at the end of the process when all the decisions and objectives have been set, possibly? And why can't recommendations 4 and 5 be run in tandem, thereby enabling our communities to have their say and be given the earliest opportunity to take part in the decision? They will feel more valued and have ownership of the decision. So why can't, because I would possibly like to put forward an amendment to this that we do include the consultation. So basically we would have 4.13, 4.14, 4.15 and 4.16. So basically we'd go with what the recommendation is, but we'd add consultation, because we've got a long time to consult, and I think we need to do that. So can Mr. Hayes advise me why we can't consult with the public now, please? Thank you. That's the first question.
Chair, it's a valid question that Councillor Wayne has asked, and it's for that reason that it's an option within the report. But you know, the experience that we have of undertaking public consultation is one that, you know, is one that we
we need to think very carefully about what it is that we want to get out of the public consultation. And if we undertake public consultation in the wrong way, then actually the public consultation that we undertake has got no value in terms of the whole process itself. And there is a danger if we go into a process of saying, okay, we've got all of these options, we've got all these things that are in the evidence base so far, which direction you want to go in, we'll end up in a situation where we'll be probably, end up with the lowest common denominator in terms of the housing numbers, because that's what we've had in terms of the consultation exercises we've done before, and that doesn't necessarily correspond with the aspirations of the district council. So the situation is in my mind as an officer making recommendations to you, there needs to be some value in that terms of shaping the direction of what we're going in. And I'm not sure we're going to get anything out of it if we go to members of the public and say, option 1, 2, 3, and 4 are ones we want to consult on, because they'll go to option 1, the lowest common denominator, and that isn't necessarily what is our aspirations as an authority. If the authority wants to change its aspirations, then that is obviously something we can give some consideration to. But at the moment, that's not something that I'm thinking we need to be doing. We need to be looking at what is appropriate for Derbyshire Dales to go forward, and that is taking a growth option that is going to deliver a more sustainable community than we've got going forward. If we have, within the options that we've had identified to us, if we maintain option 1, the minimum amount, essentially what we don't do is we don't grow the economy. The economy stays fairly stagnant. We get ageing population, and we don't get any particular growth going forward. If we move up to the higher levels of growth, the medium levels of growth, we get more of the sort of economically active members of the public coming into the district. We get much more buoyant and much more sustainable economy. And I think that's what this authority needs to be looking at. We don't want to be necessarily being in a position where we are replicating what happens within the national park and the approach that's taken in the national park. So my sort of simple answer to it is I don't think there's going to be much value in the responses we get from the public consultation, because they will just not give us anything to sort of drive us forward in terms of a mandate going in the future.
Thank you. I'll just come back on that one before I ask my next question, if that's okay with you, Chair. We don't want to be taking the Derbyshire Dales residents for fools. They can make a considered decision, and we're a professional body, and we should be putting forward a consultation that explains the pitfalls and the benefits all the way through. That's my opinion of it. And if there's no legal or other reason why, I would like to put forward a motion that we do go for consultation, as well as the option that Mr. Hayes has gone and recommended. And councillors can vote on it. Councillors can vote on it if they so wish. But I think we as an organisation will be respected more if we take the public with us, and it then is part of their actual decision as well. And I think people know that there is a big difference between the area outside the Peak Park and within the Peak Park, and I think we should bear that in mind. So that was my first question. The second one is at point 419, Mr. Hayes states that the experience indicates that a number of potential sites allocated within the local plan, there are deliverability issues. I presume one of those, and is the Gritstone Road site, which is a problematic site and is still yet to be determined after 3.5 years of deliberation. What I want to know is what additional and more comprehensive assessments are being undertaken to ensure this site is deliverable, therefore taking account of the concerns raised and the fact that the national planning guidance has been updated. I know it's within the document that you've gone and forwarded to us, which is in front of us tonight, but I want to know there are serious issues identified with that site, and I want to know what we as a council are going to do, if we wish to retain it in the local plan, what we are going to do to ensure that all those issues are remedied. Thank you.
In terms of the report, the point at 4.19 is around the fact that there are different parameters that we've set in the report for flexibility. And Councillor Rain is right. There are sites, and it's not just Gritstone Road. There are other sites where the original trajectory that we put in the adopted local plan hasn't been achieved. But nevertheless, we are continuing to work with those landowners and those developers to try and ensure that we understand where they are with the development of those sites. We're also working with people like Homes England to try and encourage them to release finance to help underwrite those sites and bring those sites forward. I think it would be wrong for me to make a particular comment on the Gritstone Road site, given the three issues are subject to a plan, or three issues that he's raised are part of the planning application process, and I think those are ones that need to be considered by the planning committee rather than necessarily this particular meeting this evening. Other than that, the issue in the report is around making sure that we have got the right level of flexibility in our calculations, and that's where we're suggesting we need to be conservative about that.
If I can just come back on the second question, I think what I'm wanting out of it all, what I'm wanting out of the new local plan is that when we're assessing these sites at an early stage, we need to ensure that all the statutory consultees are exercising due diligence and actually visiting the sites and assessing them. Because what I've personally found is that there have been loopholes, there have been pitfalls in these things, and I just want to know that there will be a robust, I'm sure there will be after this, but there is a robust actual improvement in the investigation at the early stage, so we're not letting things fester over 3.5 years.
I can assure Councillor Wayne that those agencies that may well have not necessarily provided the level of detail previously have made significant changes to their approach in terms of their assessment of sites at this stage so far.
Thank you very much. The last one, it's a quickie. I note from Mr. Yowett's question, the response says that the South Downs Park has now got its own local plan. But I'm not too fussed about what the South Downs local plan is. I'm more bothered about East Hampshire. Was there a drastic reduction in the number of homes that had to be built in East Hampshire as a result of the MP's intervention and proactive reasoning and discussions with them? Do you know that, or could you let me know later? Thank you.
Chair, there was a reduction in the housing provision within the East Hampshire core strategy. I don't know whether or not it's a result of any intervention by the MP, but that's now about 8 years ago, and the circumstances have now changed in South Downs. They have now their own local plan with their own target within it.
Thank you. And just one final thing is, if Councillor Purdy is watching, can I urge him to have a word with the MP and see if we can get her to be as vociferous and vocal in our case as it seems the MP was down in Hampshire? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wayne. Councillor Butler. Not Buttle, Butler. Sorry.
Yep. Yes, it's a clarification really. So in the report, there are 6 options. Recommendation 2 is that we're supporting option 5. Is that right? So so that means that this is not about the next steps. This is about supporting option 5, which is fundamentally different to saying this is rubber stamping the exercise of the local plan working group. This is about saying we support option 5, which is for the high growth model of development within the local plan.
This is about asking you as members to give us authority to look to see whether or not the aspirations that the council has set itself can be achieved on the supply side. And that is what option 5 is all about.
So, so if I don't support option 5, then I can't vote for the recommendations you're saying.
Logically, it would. If you don't think this is the right approach that we're taking, then I would suggest that you would either abstain or you would look to suggest an alternative way forward for us.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Cruz.
Thank you, Chair. It was coming back to the affordable housing, because I'm worried that we end up just driving for a blind target, and it was linked a little bit back to what Councillor Bright said earlier, which is we need affordable housing in the district. So I'm wondering, what can the local plan do to drive that, so that it isn't just down to the market? You said it's based on needs. So therefore, the local plan ought to be able to drive an outcome that we want, which is affordable housing. And I'm just wondered if there's any study where you talked about the economic impacts. This seems to be very much driven by economics, which clearly is important, but it's not the only outcome that we want from the local plan. So what evidence is there that the type of housing drives a better economic outcome? I would suggest more affordable housing will actually fire the economy up. So how can we use the local plan to drive that? That's my first question. I've got a follow-up one as well. Thank you. The work that the consultants have done for us on assessing housing need does include a thorough assessment of our affordable housing needs going forward. The sort of report highlights the high level, the sort of global need, if you like, going forward in the different scenarios. But within the report, it does drill down into what our affordable housing needs will be going forward. We've got policies in the plan which address that at the moment. The future policies in the plan will also address those affordable housing needs as part of the package, if you like, of policies going forward. So they won't be missed as part of it. This is just looking at, the sort of global picture at this point in time. Thank you. Just for clarification, how can the local plan make sure that we hit our affordable housing target? Because what I'm nervous about is that the market will decide, and the market doesn't always decide the best things.
Well, the approach that we have at the moment is based upon the level of need and the viability of the plan as a whole. And essentially what we're saying in the plan is that on sites over 10 units or more, you have to deliver 30% of affordable, 30% of all the need, all of the housing as affordable housing. That policy is, and the principle of that policy is likely to remain in place. What we need to work out is what that proportion is going forward. In the past, we've had a high level. We've had to bring that back to make sure we don't undermine the deliverability of the plan. We've got to see what the viability work that we're doing at the moment says to us in terms of what the proportion should be going forward.
So we can flex the proportion?
Yeah, we can. And the policy at the moment also allows for the individual circumstances of a site to be addressed. And in some instances, members will be aware that we've taken a view that, we've had to relax that policy approach to deliver the housing that's needed. And that's typically what we did at Calder Quarry, for example. I know there's been a lot of controversy about that, but that approach is what we did there, is that we looked at the costs, looked at the viability, came to the view that actually that site couldn't deliver the affordable housing that would be required by policy, but the needs of regenerating that site outweighed those other issues.
Thank you. Just then a follow-up question, separate topic, but one that's already been mentioned. It comes back to consultation, and I understand where there might be some logical reasons why you might want to defer the consultation. I think there's a reputational issue for the council at stake here. So, from your process perspective, kick it down the road a little bit further. It doesn't look right to me that we start talking to the public, from what I can tell in the timetable, after it goes to the Secretary of State. So I think it should be pulled forward. This is littered, the public participation is littered with feedback about the local plan process, and I've also had representation from Tansley Parish Council about some garden land that's been included in the local plan that wasn't in the last local plan, and I think we'd be de-snagging and picking up issues from our constituents and from stakeholders if we pull forward the consultation. So I think we should consider amending your recommendation to pull forward the consultation aspects of this process. Thank you.
Chair, just to be clear, there would be 2 periods of consultation on the plan as it is set out in the report. The first one would be at the draft modification stage. So when we've been through the process of looking at the outcomes of the work we're recommending to you to take forward this evening, and also the changes to the policies that we have or will be working on in parallel with this particular piece of work. So that will take place before it's submitted to the Secretary of State. When the draft modifications have been subject to public consultation, they will be brought back to members here. And if there are any changes to be made, they will then be subject to change. They will then be subject to public consultation as well. And at that point in time, all those public consultation responses on the draft submission modifications, the changes to the original modifications, will then be sent through to the Secretary of State with the changes themselves. So the Secretary of State will get the changes that we've made plus the consultation responses, and then the inspector will look at those and then come to a view as to what the key issues are that we need to be subject to examination on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. Before I ask them, I'd just reassure Councillor Cruz and Wayne I fully intend to return to the public consultation issue during debate and to put forward an amendment. My questions. First one, Mike, is that clearly the high growth and to some extent the recovery growth scenarios are intrinsically linked to the ambition to grow our economy through new jobs. But there is a risk with that instead we'll get a series of dormitory towns and villages where all the people occupying those dwellings, high growth dwellings, work outside the district. Do you have any, for example, travel to work evidence which could reassure us that that is unlikely to be the case? And is there any? What do you think the risk of that scenario developing, that we in fact end up with minimal number of new jobs, but a whole series of dormitory villages? That's my first question. My second question is around the sites that are included in the appendix and the assessment that has been done as to whether they're, let's say, suitable or not suitable for development. Has that schedule been discussed and endorsed by the local plan working group? In other words, are members supportive of the classification you've given to them? Or is it entirely an officer and stakeholder assessment? Now, I ask that because these are going to be made public, and the impression will be that all the sites there, in whatever category, are supported by members. So I'm interested to hear whether members have in fact had any involvement or engagement in the process of the classification of those sites.
Okay. In terms of the first question, Councillor O'Brien, yes, there is a risk that, you know, we could develop housing and those occupants of those properties could end up working elsewhere. But the counter point to that is that, you know, we're not just looking at housing. The plan is looking at housing and employment. And we will be making provision within the plan for additional employment land to ensure that those opportunities for people to live and work close together are there. And therefore, we're in a position where we're looking to, you know, improve on the sustainability of the places that we have got. So by running those two things in parallel, we are minimising the risk that people will move work elsewhere away from where they work. It's not, you know, it's not going to be a situation where every single person that comes in will work within Derbyshire Dales. That isn't going to be the situation. What we're going to do is try and address the point and minimise the amount that travel out of Derbyshire Dales by ensuring that we've got the right amount of employment land available for developers to come along and businesses to come along and bring forward over the planned period. In terms of the second question, the essence of the report that you have this evening has been through the local plan working group, and the members of the local plan working group were comfortable with the content of that note that was presented to them. They weren't asked to endorse every single site, but just to sort of, if you like, endorse the approach that we've taken and the conclusions as officers we've come to so far. There's still some more work to be done on this process, and this is basically saying to you this evening that, you know, we have done what we can on the sites that we have got so far. There are sites that we have excluded, and you can see that within the schedule and within the maps that are presented in the appendices. There is some more work to be done to look at the existing sites we've identified. There's some work to be done potentially looking at some of the sites that have been excluded. And there may well be other sites that we aren't aware of at this moment in time that may well be suitable sites going forward. And that's what we're saying to you this evening, is that we need a little bit more time to be able to do that job properly and thoroughly, so that we can then present that back to you with recommendations in the future on what is the housing target we should be going for, and B, what sites then would meet that housing target as part of the process. That's why I said right at the start of this report in the introduction that we're not looking on making any recommendations on housing numbers. We're not looking at any recommendations on housing sites. We've used the same process that we have gone through in the adopted local plan to get to where we are tonight in terms of the assessment of sites. So I'm confident in terms of the assessment work that we've done and the numbers that those are generating, and also in terms of the phasing of those sites, such that we are, you know, fairly comfortable that, you know, the evidence we presented tonight is likely to be able to stand a bit of test of time and a bit of scrutiny. But we will be doing more work on that going forward, so that then when we bring it back to you, we're confident that the recommendations to you will be very clear cut on what the housing levels will be and what the supply will be and what sites make up that supply.
Thanks for that. So just for clarification, you can give us a reassurance that the local plan working group is collectively comfortable with the site classification in the appendix.
That's my understanding of the discussion we had at the local plan working group in February, yes.
Councillor Buttle. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sit a bit closer. Right, so typical green stuff: sustainability, biodiversity, affordability. My first question, the first thoughts on seeing this were taken up by Councillor Cruz to begin with, where he was talking about, well, Mike, first off with the market will provide, which it does for the rich, and whether or not we're talking about the needs that we're going to have to meet as a planning authority. And then Paul came in with 30% affordability. Now, when we put our brief through to our consultants, can we give them options on the percentages of affordability that we'd like to see put into those sites, and whether or not they will work, and whether or not we can make them work? Because I'd very much like to see 40% affordable. I really would. You know, like, we've got plenty of rich people who can buy stuff. We've got a lot more poor people, and things are getting worse. So it'd be really nice for them to be able to have somewhere to live, which doesn't involve them living in, well, commuting out into Derbyshire to do the work that they need to do for the people who've got cash. I've done that myself. I've lived in a city, I've come into town, I've come into the rural areas, I've worked, I've gone back home. And you see the rich people going one way, the rest of us going the other. And it's not a nice way to work. I think it'd be much better if we had more affordable. So that's my first one, affordability. Sustainability. Now, when we're talking about putting housing, and are we creating large enough spaces around those houses for the people who have got some money to have a garden office? You know, like, so they don't have to work in Derby or Sheffield or like wherever it is they go to. So can we have an option to have a large enough footprint on each particular patch of ground so that the people living there can have a row of vegetables and a garden office, and they can actually, you know, like, live a more sustainable lifestyle? And my final one was the kernels of biodiversity. We had a call for land. The call for land was for development land, but I believe we also asked for allotment lands. Now, allotment lands can be any old bit of agricultural land. Will we be leaving patches of agricultural land alongside our towns and villages, which can be later developed into allotments? We're going to need allotments. We're going to need biodiversity, because when we get hit by the climate emergency and things get really tough, we're going to have to have things. We're going to have areas that survive, areas where things can start growing and moving and going back into the land that's been denuded by whatever disaster has hit us, be it flooding or fire or just massive heat waves. You know, we're going to have all sorts of things. So we're going to need to start thinking about planning for real changes. And I'd like to know whether or not that's going to be added to the brief of our consultants who are talking to us about how many houses we should be looking at. Thanks. I think that was 3 questions.
So in terms of the 3 points that Councillor Butler makes, on affordability and the delivery of affordable housing, I've said before that we have got some consultants looking at the viability of the plan as a whole, because not necessarily each policy, but policies within the plan have an impact upon the cost of development. And you know, it's quite right that we should be looking to try and deliver the right level of affordable housing and the maximising affordable housing that's appropriate for our area. But we've also got to be mindful of the fact that we also got to have a plan which is capable of being delivered on the ground. If we haven't got a plan that's capable of being delivered on the ground, that plan will not be found sound. So what we've got to do, and what the consultants that we've got working on that viability assessment work will be doing, and is looking at making a sort of a cost assumption about what the different aspects of the policy requirements are on development, and coming to a view as to what that might mean overall in terms of the viability of sites across the plan area, and, if you like, how much can we afford to charge developers in terms of affordable housing. And when we produced the local plan this time around, the adopted local plan, we had to draw back from a position of 45% back to 30%. because the cost of development had increased, and but the values hadn't necessarily given that headroom to allow us to maintain that 45%. So we had to reduce that to make sure we could deliver affordable housing, deliver all the other policy requirements, and deliver the housing at the same time. And that challenge is what we've still got this time around. And that's going to reflect what the current sort of circumstances we find ourselves in relation to the cost and values of property and land. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that there is a return back to the landowner, because if the landowner doesn't have enough money in his pocket, he will not release the land to the developer to build those houses. So all of that is why we sort of have to sort of look at that sort of viability process. But we do, and we should, maximise on the level of affordable housing in the plan. In terms of sustainability, you know, the policies that we will be looking at will seek to ensure that we deliver on the aspirations that members have got in relation to mitigating climate change, but also at the same time ensuring that, you know, we are delivering the sorts of houses which are appropriate for the future populations of the district. The local plan we have at the moment, and it was, you know, pretty much unanimously supported across all parties last time, included a requirement for dwellings to become smaller size, because that's reflective of the population changes that we're going through over the course of the next few years. And that sort of pattern is likely to remain in the future, where household sizes are reducing. Is it right and is it proper that we have big, large properties where there may well be under occupancy, whereas if we deliver smaller properties, they're going to be likely to be more affordable for the younger people maintain themselves within the district. So there is a trade-off between that desire to make sure that there is people given the opportunity to work from home versus the level of need and the type of properties that future population might need. But, you know, that is something that we will be looking at and trying to sort of dwell upon, if you like, over the course of the next few months in terms of the development of our policies. In terms of biodiversity and allotments, we have got a call for sites for allotments that's live at the moment. We did have one before Christmas that didn't result in any sites. I know that some members have been having discussion with landowners about that, and we will await the results of that through that call for sites process. And as I've said in the response to some of the public participation that we've had this evening, we will be trying to ensure that the policy in biodiversity and biodiversity net game are appropriate to Derbyshire Dales, taking account of the evidence that we've got and the availability of land that we've got going forward.
Could I follow up on? Can I follow up? Just a final question. I'm thinking about the affordable housing that we're going to be creating, and you're concerned that the footprint of land and the house is going to be large, if it's a large footprint, and things are going to, you know, we're going to end up with only small houses can be affordable. Why is that? Why do we have to have only small houses to be affordable? Can we not have things which are like 150 square feet per bedroom set as the minimum standard for affordability, like the council houses used to be in the past? You know, like we used to have a decent sized main bedroom, a decent sized second bedroom and a box room. And is nothing we can do to actually make that possible again? Because people are living in tiny little hutches now, you know, and it's just not right. We should be working towards that as well. I know that might not be part of this whole discussion. I might be going off track, but I'd really like us to look at that if we could. Thank you.
I'll bear that in mind when we're looking at the policies.
Right, members, I am conscious of the time, so I'm looking for somebody to propose an extension of the meeting. Councillor Finesse and Councillor Shirley do second that. All in favour, please show. Okay, that's unanimous. Right, we will carry on. We're on questions. Can we get these over a bit more quicker, please? Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you again, Chair. I don't have a question directly unless I frame it rhetorically.
If that's not an actual question, can I come back to you in the debate side of it then? Let's get the questions out. Then that's what we will do. Thank you. Councillor Gamble, question.
Yeah, it is a question. Oh, sorry, it's been that long now. I've lost my pad. It's gone. It was on the period. So after coming on from Councillor Waynes and Councillor Cruz, you sort of. Oh, sorry. Yeah. You stipulated, Mike, that there's going to be a sort of pre-consultation, which you say is going to be before it goes to Secretary of State. So we're looking at, presumably, are we between April and June 2024? Just quickly, yes or no to that?
The consultation that we would do as part of the sort of statutory process would be at the draft modification stage, which would be in October 2023 at this moment in time. And that's what's in the timetable we set out on page 128.
Oh, right, okay. I've got a draft, so at the draft modification stage then, yeah. That was what it'd be. Yeah. I mean, what is stopping us doing it now or earlier on and finding out what people want? I was a little bit concerned by the reply, which seemed to be, I don't want to do it now, because they won't agree with me, which I think is a sort of a slightly backward way of doing consultation. And the other question, really, I mean, I would have thought we want to go into this process knowing what the public are actually interested in terms of a few things, really. In terms of, I mean, you're very obsessed. Obviously, there's lots of in this report about housing numbers. There's very little about the design of house and the sort of areas that we actually want to plan to have in the district. Is that going to come later? And then just, sorry, I'm coming back to the question. You talk about the value of consultation. Myself, I would like to see what you think the value of a consultation that takes place in October 24, that's when it starts, to have taken place and presumably it have been, had a look at and any sort of modifications you think need to be taken account of that, to then present in December 2024. That doesn't seem a lot of time to really seriously look at and actually take notice to the point where you can actually incorporate that into a plan. To be actually, I would say, to be a consultation of value.
Yeah, I understand what Councillor Gamble is saying in terms of the value of public consultation and understand, how it may well have come across in terms of my response. What I'm trying to sort of say to members is that, we are looking at a review of the local plan. There are areas of the local plan which we as a council need to make decisions upon, and then be subject those to consultation. If we were to do consultation at this point in time, I would anticipate that the responses we would get would be potentially, as I was alluding to before, at odds with what the council has already agreed as being its direction of travel in terms of the sort of corporate plan, economic plan, and COVID recovery plan. However, saying that, there may well be an opportunity for us to look at trying to build some form of consultation into the work we do with the consultants, for example, and look at whether or not there are opportunities to identify ways in which we can engage with the public as part of that process. Without necessarily undermining or changing the recommendation, but bearing in mind, looking at the sort of the specification that we look and put out to the market. So I think there might be some opportunities there. if we were to do it at this moment in time, I think what we'd end up is a situation where we'd end up with members of the public saying, I'll put it bluntly, we don't want the houses, or we want the houses and we want the lowest number possible. In fact, actually, we don't want the number that the government say you've got to have as a minimum. And that's completely at odds with what, as an authority, as a whole, we have already agreed.
But it would give you a steer about what the local people actually want. And if nothing else, shouldn't we be, you know, you talk about our direction of travel, shouldn't our direction of travel be to create a Derbyshire Dales that the residents of Derbyshire Dales want? And shouldn't they have some input into deciding what that Derbyshire Dales is?
I agree, Councillor Gamble, but that process has been through in terms of, there's two processes we've been through, and the corporate plan that we've prepared has been subject and was based upon a large resident survey across the whole of the district. So what we've done in preparing our corporate plan is look at and discuss with residents what it is that they want to see the district look like going forward. That has then shaped what goes into the corporate plan. So in some regards, the members of the public have had their say on what the shape of the district will be in the future. And that is a very clear message about growth in terms of the economy and making sure that the right level of housing is delivered to meet the needs in the future. That sort of strategic approach and a strategic decision, if you like, and direction has already been given to members through that particular piece of work. What we're doing in the local plan is sort of saying, right, okay, these are the detail levels that could be the way forward for you going forward in terms of putting the flesh on the bones of that particular strategy. If we get, as I say, if we go out to consultation, because of the experience we've had, I think we would end up in a situation where we can do it, but would it add any value to the process, and would it add any value to what we've done so far? But as I say, there is an opportunity, there may well be an opportunity for us to build into the work we do with the consultants to say to them, look, let's do some public consultation on the work that we're doing and looking at it.
I think what it is, to get some down on...
Councillor Gamble, I think
the people have to ask questions.
You've made your point and we're going over, and I think Mike has actually said this 2 or 3 times. I did actually want to
ask another question on a different question, actually.
Yeah, but you were carrying on with that one.
All right, can I ask a different question?
A different question.
If we're talking about affordable type of houses we're going to build for economically, I think Councillor Buttle makes a really good point about the fact that they are going to need to be affordable, surely, aren't they? Because, I mean, as Councillor O'Brien's point, sort of, in terms of what's been happening in the districts, from what I can understand from sort of background papers that were given when we looked at what's had happened, what's going to make you think that the housing you make now will create the jobs that the sort of demographic we're getting buying houses in this area are going to find jobs? Because if you actually look at the demographics, what we have is we actually have a high number of residents with level 4 and above qualifications. But then if you look at the stats of what they're doing, they're majoritively going out of the district to work, because the sort of work that people with a level 4 qualification have, there aren't jobs around here with those. You're travelling out to do those. So how do you know you're not just going to carry on building houses for that demographic to carry on buying them and travelling out to work? Well, the sort of jobs that you're creating at your industrial estates maybe not as well paid from that. And if you've got high-priced houses in this area, how do you know those people are going to be able to afford to buy the houses that you build?
Yeah, as I said to Councillor O'Brien, there is a risk that the approach that we take ends up with the population, with some of the residents that come into the district travelling outside of the area. But we have a a strategy and plan which Steve and Giles have been working on for a number of years now, which is looking at trying to deliver sort of higher value jobs. And if we were able to deliver those higher value jobs as part of, if you like, the whole process that we're looking at, not just in terms of the policies and the use of land, but also actually the implementations through the work that Steve and Giles does, then we've got a much better chance of being able to maintain the people that buy those properties working within the district, because the type and nature of jobs that they would take would be the type and nature of jobs that we've been trying to, if you like, encourage to come into the district through our economic development activities.
Thank you for that. Right, I'm moving on. Councillor Finesse, question?
It is a question. Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm going back to the South Downs and Hampshire this situation which has been discussed. We all know that national parks can't build new market housing unless it's on a brownfield site, and there aren't any left, pretty much. So I understand that South Downs have set themselves a target now of 250 affordable houses a year. If we could persuade Peak Park to do that, how would it affect our local plan?
Depends on the number, Councillor Finesse, at the end of the day.
So
there would have to be quite a significant number within the national park to make any sort of inroads into the sort of shortfalls that we're looking at in this particular report.
Well, say it was 250.
My brain's addled at this point in time, so it would make a significant indent, because actually the levels that we're looking at here are sort of in the order of 230 to, well, if they were 250, for example, that would take all of our needs. If it was 302, then it's making a significant proportion. But clearly, you get a lot of pushback from the national park as to whether or not they can achieve that. And at the end of the day, we have to make sure the plan is deliverable, and that's looking at what happens within the local plan area, but also being confident that we've got agreement on through the duty to cooperate with the national park, that the level of development that they anticipate will come forward is one that they're happy with. And that's the dilemma. If we say, right, 60, 70 a year, and they say we can't achieve that, then it we're already undermining our ability to deliver that plan and make that plan a sound plan.
The question is, if they did accept it, if they did say we could do 250 a year, maybe 150 is on our patch. So would that mean
it would make a significant difference? Yes.
So could we cut out some of the developments we've got planned here?
What would happen is that there would be a more even distribution of the development across the district.
Yeah.
And that's the dilemma we've got, is that, and we've said this before, is that 50% of the district is accommodating 95% of the requirement. Even if this was a district without a national park, and we were the planning authority for the whole of the district, the distribution would be significantly wider and significantly more evenly spread.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Salt, question.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got it right that the numbers aren't where you want to see for what you think is right for the growth of the area, and you want to use a consultant to see how we can grow those from the options that have come forward. My question is, do you think there's any merit in a consultation which isn't just a consultation on how many numbers do you want, so they come back, and I completely take your point that they will come back and say, want the minimum amount of numbers, I don't want anybody building houses around here, fair enough, because that's what you hear from most people. But I wonder if you think there's merit in using that consultation, because obviously you can frame these consultations as you wish, to let the wider public know exactly the position we're in, because I do wonder sometimes whether they all do understand what we're up against in terms of building. So give that form of education out as part of the consultation, say, this is the position we're in, this is what we think we need to do to grow the Derbyshire Dales, and then that's where your consultation begins, and run that at the side of what you want to do with the consultants. Thank you, Chair.
It's an approach that we have taken previously, where we've presented the evidence to members of the public across the district, and you know, we've used consultants to prepare evidence for us in the past, and on the basis of the experience we've gone through in the past, trying to educate, no disrespect, trying to educate the members of the public, and it's not belittling them, but it's they have got a view. It's very hard for them to sort of, much as we want to try and educate them, I'm not sure that if we did that, but I think we can look at something as part of this consultation exercise, part of this consultants' work, to see whether or not there's an opportunity to as we develop our thinking on an approach, that we can have some discussions with the members of the public at that point, taking what we've got at the moment and developing and working that forward.
Thank you. Councillor Burford, have you a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would first of all like to thank Mike. He's been bombarded with questions tonight, so thank you. I hope mine are quite brief. I've always been interested in this idea of a new village within our district. Have we tried as hard as we can to find a site, and is there anything else that we can possibly do to bring that forward? That's the first question. Do you want them all at once?
If I can answer that question very simply, Councillor Burford. That's what we're asking members to sort of endorse this evening. Not the principle of a new village, but actually for us to engage more proactively than we have done in the past, to look at whether or not a new village is part of the options that we might need to look at going forward.
Because I think what you might find is that if we do go to an early consultation, that's probably what the public would favour, if I'm honest. The next question, I suspect to know the answer to, but have we ever considered when we're in the local plan, when we talk about large development sites, the idea of having an area allocated for allotments?
Not specifically. There is a policy in the plan which supports already the development of allotment sites. So if that was offered up by a developer, as long as we can maintain the management arrangements, there would be no reason why that couldn't take place now as part of any development. It's not something we've necessarily had a discussion with. I'll be honest, it's not something we've necessarily had a formal discussion with the developer as part of any planning application process. But in theory, it could be offered up at this moment in time.
I suspect they'd say viability, wouldn't they? But you know, if we could pursue that one, maybe. I suppose the next thing I wanted to just, well, it's kind of a question really, but you know, I'm struggling with this idea of not consulting the public at an earlier stage. I mean, Councillor Wayne made his point, Councillor Salt made some good points. I do think, you know, I do think the public have got a right to have their say, even if it's on broad issues. And the other thing is about this is a question, I promise, about development on brownfield sites. Now, we know that we've got a brownfield site in Matlock that's been partly developed, Corder Quarry. The houses and the flats are not really selling because they're too expensive, and everybody here knows that. But do the numbers that are allocated there, do they still count towards the total numbers of houses, of the housing provision?
Yeah, they are part of the calculation because they've got the benefit of planning permission already. So they already been counted within the overall calculations that we've been doing, and they are included within the calculations we've done on the 5-year supply. So they are part of the numbers on the supply side.
Yeah, yeah. Even though you know that they are being used as holiday homes, and they're in quite a few of them. Does that make any difference?
They have got the benefit of planning permission for dwellings. My understanding on some of the uses are temporary, and I understand that some of them have now reverted back to normal properties on the open market.
Yeah. I mean, just a question following on from that is that I think it was Councillor Wayne. Well, I'm sure it was Councillor Wayne who said if Councillor Purdy's listening to, and I hope he is, to if he can put pressure on our MP to talk, you know, to talk about brownfield sites, and because the problem seems to be that the cost of decontamination is putting up the prices of the houses that are eventually being built, and that's causing this problem that there is.
The issue of brownfield sites is one that we are, as officers, acutely aware of, and the sites that we have identified in the plan, in the adopted plan, they haven't come forward for various reasons in the time frame that we'd originally envisaged. Nevertheless, they do provide an opportunity to make a significant contribution towards meeting our housing needs, and I think, you know, they need to be further work done on that to ensure that, you know, they can make that contribution without us having to then have too many more incursions into you know, the development of greenfield sites. Steve and I have had discussions with Homes England directly around what support they can give to those landowners, and you know, it's not just Calder Quarry. There are you know, some big sites in Wordsworth that, you know, are part of that process, and we need to be sort of using whatever mechanisms we can to encourage those landowners to, you know, realise that they have an asset there, and that there is support within the government financially as much as anything else to ensure that, you know, those sites can come forward. And the government wants, you know, the Homes England is an agency that's been given quite a you know, broad brief by the government to make sure that, you know, the 300,000 houses a year that it set itself as a target to deliver are delivered. And it's given Homes England a significant budget to deliver that. We've got to try and persuade. We've got to try and persuade those landowners and those developers to, you know, use whatever means that they can, if it's primary money, loans, grants, whatever is available to deliver them.
What's stopping them? What do you think the reason is that they're not getting developed?
In some instances, it's around the fact that it's not their core business. It's not, you know, the sites in Wordsworth, it's not their core business. The landowners in that particular instance have shut down their sort of property arm over COVID. They're beginning to start to look at it again, but you know, it's their main business is mineral extraction. It's not around development of sites, and in some instances it's around just saying, well, we just want to get rid of that site and make it as easy as possible to do it. But you know, it's not going to be that easy. It's not going to be okay, because when they look at what's needed to be done on those sites, the cost of that, they'll end up in a situation where actually they need to do something themselves to realise that that site is capable of being built, being brought forward.
I've got two more people for questions. Councillor Bright. question?
I was a comment, so if I can
Right,
hold off
okay,
until...
we'll hold that off
Thank
then.
you.
Councillor Shirley, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got two questions, really. The first one is relating to the consultants' work and our more proactive approach. Assuming that they will be working to identify sites which are deliverable in planning terms, but also where there is the capacity, enthusiasm of the landowner to develop, and therefore likely to come forward, rather than be stuck with problems that we've got with more difficult sites. That was the first question. I hope there'll be a yes or no answer to that. My second question is over this rather protracted discussion we've had about consultation and when we have it and what it will include, I assume that when we do move to the proposed consultation at the modification stage, that will include the overall numbers throughout the district that are anticipated, but also the location and numbers on each individual site, as well as the rest of the policies on affordability and proportions. I'm an advocate of consulting people, but I think it is very important that you consult them at a time when their input is actually helpful to the residents themselves, helpful to the authority, but also actually can have an impact. I sat through quite a lot of discussions at the last local plan revision, 2 of them, I think, and there was an awful lot of time expended on why has this site come in and then gone out and come back in again at each site. So if it can be consulted on, where at least it feels a worthwhile consultation, that's better than going off too early and then you build up people's expectations.
Yeah, Councillor Shirley, the answer to your first question is yes. We will need landowners to be willing to release their sites to enable them to be identified as being available, achievable, and then ultimately deliverable. Because otherwise, if we don't have that in the first instance, we might as well stick a pin in every piece of land where we want to develop, and say that's suitable for development, and that's not going to get us a deliverable plan. That's not going to get us a sound plan at the end of the day. The point you make about consultation is correct, that in the draft modifications, when we get to that particular stage, it will identify what we've, as an authority, we would consider to be the most appropriate housing numbers and housing target, and also which sites would then contribute to achieving that, and what numbers would go on each of those individual sites. So yes, that would be that at that particular point in time.
Thank you. That has exhausted all questions. I am quite concerned as regards the timing. Obviously, we've not got to a conclusion of this actual item. It's nearly 5:02, so I'm not going to beat about the bush. Is anybody prepared to propose another extension for another half an hour to see if we can get this moved forward? Propose. Second. All in favour for another half hour? Against? Abstentions?
Can we just do that again?
Okay.
Hands are going around all over.
Okay, right.
Sorry.
So we're having...
Chair, sorry, could I have just some clarification? If this doesn't go through, if we haven't got enough time to vote on this item, the whole discussion starts again from square one at the next meeting.
Yeah, if it assistant,
Is that
the
right?
duration, I'll just read it. Unless the majority of the councillors present vote for a meeting to continue, any meeting that has lasted 2.5 hours will adjourn immediately. The meeting will continue for a further 30 minutes and be extended at the chairman's discretion to enable the business to conclude, to avoid any suspension in debate on a particular item. Any outstanding matters will be adjourned to a future meeting. Therefore, if you don't vote to go any further, the meeting ends and is adjourned.
So then you would start all over again.
Yeah.
So with that clarified, I hope you all heard it. We've got a vote of proposing for another half hour. We have to do it half hour at a time. So all those in favour of moving on for another half hour, please show of hands. Against? Abstentions? So it's carried. So we're moving on. So now we are going to go into debate. And I need a proposer or a motion. Councillor, sorry. I'll come to you.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I would like to propose the recommendation as shown on the agenda, and I think it is. We know that there will be consultation at a later date at a suitable time, so I think that would be useful. We obviously need, in order to achieve the levels of growth that we aspire to, we need to be much more proactive in our approach. I think looking at a new village is a good idea, although I'm always quite sceptical, because I think the idea of saying we want a village here is great. Not so good when you have to get new services to it, and you also have to convince a number of people to be involved in that delivery. So it can be more complex. But I think we've got good recommendations here. We know that it's going to go to consultation, and therefore I would suggest that this is an opportune time to vote in favour of the recommendation.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll support that. I just want to say, we have a housing crisis in this country. We've got a lot of crises going on at the moment. And what I've heard is lots of people trying to, unfortunately, and I think it's the wrong place, trying to rewrite the local plan in this meeting. It's not the place to do it. We need to get this moving. Labour failed to build enough houses when they were in power. Lib Dems and Conservatives, when they had a coalition, failed to build enough houses. And the Conservatives are failing to do it now. So let's lead by example, get this moving, get this local plan going. I can assure you, I was in the local, I think a few members here were in the last local plan advisory board. There is a heck of a lot of consultation. Honestly, the newer members, don't be concerned. People get their say, and they definitely take advantage of it. So take that from me. I've been here for 12 years, and they do get their say. And I agree with Councillor Shirley. Until they know what they're feeding back on, how can they really give a good level of feedback consultation until they know the direction of travel? So I will support this, and I hope we can get this moving and get the local plan, the revision, moving along quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien. I saw you waving nicely at me.
Well, I want to table an amendment to that proposal to the effect that a programme of public consultation engagement is developed in collaboration with the local plan working group in relation to the next phase of the local plan work for incorporation in the timetable. In support of that amendment, I think there appears to be, if you like, a fear amongst some officers and some members that the public, A, aren't capable of understanding the complexities and the intricacies of a local plan, and that, as others have said, they may not agree with the direction of travel. Well, I have to say, I think the first is a little bit insulting on the intelligence of our residents, and I think the second is rather arrogant on our behalf to think that we know best. I think a process of engagement, I think a process of talking with and listening to our communities, our town and parish councils during the next phase, explaining what it is that we're about is healthy, listening to them, and that informs the way we develop these options. And what it does, it means that when we come to the formal consultation at the end of the process, then we have far less confrontational consultation and participation. And I think that's what we as a council, we're about. We are about working with our communities. We're about consultation. I think that's not a party political point. That's something which the work of this council is built upon. So that's that point. The other point I want to make, a general point, is that there's an impression when you read this report that preparing a local plan is all about numbers. And what makes a good local plan is you get the numbers right. Well, that isn't what makes a good local plan. What makes a good local plan is that you promote development in sustainable locations and you focus on creating places and not numbers of houses. And I'd simply say to the local plan working group, you please don't lose sight of that objective. Don't get so wrapped up in these numbers that you forget about we're finding the right places for development, the right quality of development. And I think, as others have said, the opportunity to look at, for example, a new village development, that gives us the opportunity to say, we don't need all the, we don't necessarily need all these sites that have been previously identified in the past, which we may think are inappropriate, but we're having to put them in because we've got no choice. We now have the opportunity to say, well, actually, this is what we think is the best way of developing for our district and our residents and meeting our sustainability objectives. So I just would encourage those of you who are working on the local plan to always keep that in mind. And I know that meeting a housing target is important, but it's not the driving force behind a good local plan. So with that in mind, I hope you support that amendment.
Does that find a seconder? Although we're not yet. Okay. You understood what it was as such? No. Yeah. Okay. You're going to second it. What I'm going to do is ask for clarification through Lee.
That's what I was going to do.
So can we have full clarification to what you are proposing, Councillor? Shortly. Precise, concise.
Sorry, Kate. Could you just repeat the wording of your amendment, please, Councillor O'Brien, so we can make sure we've written it down accurately? Thank you.
I said that I propose that a programme of public consultation and engagement is developed in collaboration with the local plan working group relating to the next phase of the preparation of the local plan review, or the local plan, for incorporation in the timetable.
So, Chair, I got everything but the last. So, a programme of public consultation and engagement developed in consultation with the local plan working group relating to the next phase of the local plan review in line with... timetable. Thank you, Councillor.
Can I just ask how I read this and different things? Is this not incorporating option 4 under what you're trying to ask, Councillor O'Brien?
No, it's not. I'd like the amendment to go forward as stated, Chair, please.
Okay, thank you. Just for clarification. Sorry. Councillor Cruz.
Thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate it. I think there's been some really good comments made. I'm going to keep my extra comments brief. I think it's great that we're trying to be proactive, so I totally support that. And I do think Councillor Bright mentioned pace, and we don't want to mess about. I agree with that too. I think we can do this in parallel, though. I think we can be smart about that. So that's why I think we do need to be much more engaging and inclusive. And it feels like we are being a bit exclusive. Maybe not the intention, but that's certainly how it feels. And that's how it will feel to our residents. So I think we need to expand the consultation process, get residents engaged up front, avoid the confrontation down the back end. I think that would be good. And maybe it's not a question for answering now, but something to think about. Can we consult people in the Peak Park? Can they be part of our consultation? The corporate plan has been mentioned as the reason why we're doing this. The people in the Peak Park are part of the corporate plan. So if we're going to talk about the corporate plan, we ought to talk about the Peak Park. And can we also consult with people who work in the Peak Park? Because they are future residents, and we ought to be considering full stakeholder constituents rather than a very narrowly defined consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe, you did want to make some comments earlier. Would you like to come in at
I,
this point?
I won't, Chair, other than very briefly to say I found all the comments and discussions this evening extremely excuse me, interesting, being a member of this working plan group. But actually, I'm going to surrender my time to my colleague here, Councillor Buckle, who I know has been anxious to say something which I think is extremely relevant. So if you hear him rather than me rattling on.
Councillor Butler. Councillor Butler.
Good, no pressure. Colleagues, I'd like you to have a look at, take a moment to look at the options in front of us in the local plan review. I participated in many of the local plan review sessions and was very surprised when Councillor Purdy suggested recommending the highest level of house building of 302 houses per year during our discussion about housing site allocations. The information in the report is clear. I've asked on 3 separate occasions where the economic benefits of the higher growth strategy will be realised. I've been told they're theoretical overall benefits and it's too complex to work out where the money goes. What's clear is that it's not necessarily to our community in the Derbyshire Dales. The report acknowledges that the higher growth strategy cannot deliver good environmental objectives. The environmental impacts of the higher growth strategy would go to the residents of the Derbyshdale Dales, whether that's through the loss of open space in Brailsford, the increased risk of flooding in Roseley, Darleydale and Matlock Bath, and the continued deterioration of air quality for the residents of Ashbourne. These impacts are real and will only be felt by our residents. I'd also like to remind members about the Dasgupta review of the economic impacts of biodiversity, commissioned by Conservative Chancellor Philip Hammond and endorsed by the current government, which identified the critical impact of ecosystems and biodiversity on human society. The benefits of the natural world enable us to survive as a society, and the natural world is in serious trouble. We've had 4 1-in-100-year floods in the last 2 years. The Environment Agency models for flood risk mitigation and sustainable drainage schemes are out of date, being produced about 10 years ago. It's the best data that they have, and it's being reviewed, but it's wrong. Flooding is going to increase, particularly in the Derwent Valley, as the temperature increases. Unfortunately, that's not politics, it's physics. All of the numbers on this planet are only going in one direction, and that bodes very badly for human life. What's all this got to do with our local plan review? It's all connected. I was passed a report this week that outlined the impact of house building on climate change, which I shared with you all yesterday. The government suggested that as a mechanism for boosting the economy, we should be building 300,000 new houses per year. Independent research has shown that building those houses and failing to improve the energy efficiency of existing housing stock will use 113% of the whole of the UK's 2050 carbon budget based on us keeping to 1.5 degrees. This is the option 5 that's proposed that we support. I completely agree that we need to do more about affordable homes, but let's insist that all developers include 40% of their developments as affordable homes. There must be things that we can do on that if we want. Let's see, I read with interest Michael Gove's work on closing tax loopholes on second homes, for example. And let's do more to insulate the environmentally poorly performing properties across the district, although we are doing fantastic work on that. I will definitely be reminding residents over the next 15 months that we didn't have to build 300, 300 houses a year across the Derbyshire Dales. With the associated impacts on our residents, we're only obliged to build 230. It's a decision that we're doing to do that, knowing that there are consequences for every resident of the Derbyshire Dales. I look forward to talking to the residents of Ashbourne, Brailsford, Masson, Stanton and Darleydale who will know that their lives are going to be negatively impacted by the option that's proposed we support today, although that they may not see the economic benefits. The most energy efficient house is one that you don't build. The best suds are the ones that you don't need, and the best green space is the one that doesn't have houses on it. So I'm asking people to support option 1.
Councillor Slack.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think we have to have placards at the back here. We should out of the way. Right, I do agree with what a lot of Matthew has already said about climate change. It is the most pressing thing which we've got in our future. But looking at what we're looking at tonight, consultation first of all. Timing of consultation has got to be exactly right. It can't be too early and it can't be too late. It's got to meet a broader section of the public. At the moment, it's basically based on emails. You've got to get out there with clipboards to where the people are when they're coming out of supermarkets, when they're doing the shopping. But you've got to have present them with diagrams and designs. I think with this climate, what's happening now with the economy, with fuel prices rocketing, and they're not going to come down in hurry, fuel prices. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be with us a long time. So we're going to have to look at different models of houses. I believe that we really should be building for the many, not the few. And I think, to be honest, smaller is better and warmer. And I think we've got to build more smaller homes. Mike's already put that forward, having more smaller homes. We've got to go for more smaller homes. We've got to look at different designs like terraced houses where they are warmer again. They keep the heat together. We've also got to look at different designs where some properties have solar panels, some have heat source pumps, so some don't, and because of the cost. But we've got to have all them designs put out so the public can look at them and say to me, yeah, we agree with that design, we agree with that design. We've got to get these designs. It's the public who we're looking for houses for, not what we think, it's what the public think, and we should represent the public in that way. So I believe that we should be going out when we get all these designs together, same as at Norwich and all them places where they put some wonderful housing developments together. We should be putting all these different designs together and going out to the public with it and then get consultation on it. And that's the way we should be going. And in regard to solar panels, yes, we desperately need solar panels on majority of houses. We should have probably a few where people can't afford, but when it's all weighed up, you gain. People, if it's explained to people, if you have solar panels, you have heat source pumps, you're going to be a net gainer in the long term because fuel prices, I've just said, are going to keep going up and up and up and up. And we've got to take account of this in future. That's our future. So, Chair, that's where I see the prospect. And now you can put this into into the policy, Mike. Thank you.
Councillor Allison, comment.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make one quick point. As a village that has had nearly 150 houses built in the last 4 or 5 years, I can guarantee you that very few of those occupants actually work in the Derbyshire Dales. Mostly, I mean, there's 2 estates were actively marketed as having good transport links to larger cities where you could live and then you could travel to Birmingham, into Stoke, into Nottingham, into Derby to go to work. What I also want to mention also is that the nature of the way we are working as a society is changing. High value jobs are hybrid, they are remote. Those kind of people, they're not looking for jobs in their local area. I'm a fully remote worker working for a company in London at the moment. It just isn't, that isn't the way our economy is developing, and I think we need to start taking that into account in our local plan. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Right. I'm afraid I'm not going to be taking any more discussions. I think we exhausted quite a lot with questions. So I am asking to go to the vote on the amendment. Yes, thank you. So we are voting on the amendment. I'm going to ask Lee, because he's written it down, to tell me what it is. So please all listen, because it's not going to be repeated again, and then we're going for the vote.
Councillor O'Brien, I'm taking this as an additional motion. So number 5, programme of public consultation and engagement developed in consultation with the local plan working group relating to the next phase of the local plan review for incorporation within the project timetable. Is that correct? Good.
As well as one, two, as well as the others. Can I ask, because obviously I'm getting a bit confused now, is this incorporating all the other recommendations on there? You've added number 5 with your amendment. Yes, right,
Yes.
good. Okay, so we are looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 5 being the new amendment on that. So that's what we're going to be voting on. So can we have a show of hands? All in favour, please show hands.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
No, against?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7. Okay.
Abstentions.
So that abstention. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, cracky. Okay. Right. But there was more 4.
Yes, there's more 4. So that's
So-
now incorporated. So now it's the
So that has been incorporated in the substantive motion now. Again, I don't believe we need to do any more talk on this. So I am going to the vote, please, on the new substantive motion, recommendations 1 to 4, with the added recommendation 5 in as proposed. All in favour, please show. Against? Abstentions? 4. Does that tally up right? 21 of us here. Then the motion is carried. Sorry? I don't believe that we've not concluded our meeting. I think the next item would be too long to go on. If we felt that, so I think looking at this, we'll just ask for the sealing of documents. Can I have anybody to propose that? All in favour? Yeah. So with that, I'm closing the meeting. Sorry.